Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Was the Black Sheep of the Uchiha Clan. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. A standard patrol of Konoha nin silently made their way across the country they had been assigned to. Most would consider it to be a dangerous route to watch considering its close proximity to the land of clouds, plus it didn't help that there were rumors of another hidden village springing up in the land of rice fields. Still, the group continued on with their duties. After all, there truly wasn't any valid reason to be uncomfortable. Konoha and Kumo hadn't been at war for decades. Still, the unit leader didn't let his men slack off, for such a thing wasn't becoming of his village. As vigilant as the border patrol was, they simply couldn't be expected to catch the individuals that were ghosting their zigzagging path. Especially since they were high-ranking Chunin. Raijin and Fujin silently tracked the Chunin patrol with an unconscious Naruto over Raijin's shoulder. Since their informant had obviously gotten something incorrect, there wasn't supposed to even be a patrol this far out, they were having to improvise. Still, it wasn't that much of a challenge for the two shinobi, as they had dodged border patrols on their way into the land of fire. Still, the exercise slowed their exit considerably as Konoha patrol routes were notoriously random so as to confuse spies. It was said that only the Hokage himself knew where every one of his country's patrols were at any given time. Of course, the two Kumo nin weren't overly concerned about their escape time. They were positive it would be a few days before any Anbu were sent from the village. There was a fire here, Pakun stated as he sniffed around a relatively normal-looking patch of bare forest. Kakashi, Asuma, Anko, and Ino were looking around to try and find any sign of Naruto's kidnappers as Pakun continued trying to find the trail he had just lost. Kakashi walked over to the line of trees where his pug summons was standing. A fire over here by the trees. I don't think these shinobi are ignorant, he stated. Pakun shook his little head. I don't know where the fire was, I just smell the lingering smell of charcoal over here. They probably cleared the area out before moving on. Asuma looked at the direction the dog had been sniffing before turning back to the campsite. So, they camped here for the night and then cleaned up before they left. Most likely, the same jutsu that was used in Naruto's apartment was used here to erase any trace of their presence. It was complete luck that one of them walked near the fire then off to the woods so that the scent of the fire would be outside of the jutsu's area of effect. Ino blinked. Wow. That's pretty good, sensei, she praised. If her lazy team leader acted like this on half of the mission's team 10 did, then they could get done much quicker. Anko, however, was in no mood to ponder anything and she pushed past Asuma to grab the little dog up by the scruff of his neck. Which way did they go? She snapped. If they stopped for the night then we've gained some ground, we can't just sit here. Anko, calm down, Kakashi moaned. It was pathetic in his opinion. Ino was carrying herself better than the special Junin at the moment. If you let your personal feelings towards Naruto dictate your actions now, you'll only be a hindrance. The words hit the woman like a bucket of cold water. She promptly dropped Pakun to the ground and walked off to the other side of the clearing with an unreadable face. Ino frowned a bit at Kakashi, the guy had no tact. Apparently, Asuma had the same thought as he too frowned at the other Junin. That was too harsh, Kakashi. You know what Anko is dealing with right now and I know you know about her history. The Junin shrugged. The fact remains she's being a hindrance. Even more than the genin you brought along. This is not a field trip, this is a mission to save the life of my nephew, Kakashi fired back with a bit of anger creeping into his tone. I won't have him die because someone's hormones are screwed up. Enough, Asuma ordered. For just an instant, Kakashi was about to turn his anger full force on Asuma for ordering him around, but that was quashed ruthlessly when Kakashi really looked into the man's eyes. What he saw made him instantly sober into something akin to fear. Asuma sighed and lit one of his cigarettes. Don't blame Anko for things she cannot control. You know better than anyone what she went through and what she's struggling with now. I agree that she was acting irrational, but... Kakashi held up his hands in defeat. No, you're right, the Junin agreed with a tired sigh. Still, she's going to have to control herself if we're going to catch up with Naruto. Well, not everyone can be as calm as you, Ino stated in Anko's defense. The two men looked over at her as if they had forgotten she was present. I mean, Naruto's practically her nephew too, so of course she'd be worried. Kakashi gave the young girl a bland look. Right, nephew, he mumbled under his breath. Before Ino could reprimand the man any further, Orochi called for the group from the other side of the clearing. Kakashi, Asuma, and Ino all rushed over to the snake, who was still hanged, as he scowled at a point in the forest. What is it? Asuma asked. They went this way, the serpent pointed at the section of forest in front of him. I can taste a few other trails, though. It looks like the Kumo nin are trailing whoever it is. Ino, Anko, and even Kakashi looked puzzled by this, but Asuma groaned. They're following one of our patrols. How the hell did they know where they were? He asked himself more than his companions. Anko's eyes narrowed. They're getting the information from someone inside of Leaf. It has to be someone in the Hokage Tower because no one outside of the Hokage and administrative nins know the patrol routes, she said even as she regarded Asuma with a bit of suspicion. The other Junin didn't seem at all concerned with it, however, and he merely walked off towards the forest. We need to get moving. The patrol came through around 3 hours ago if they were on schedule, so that means we're catching up. If they make it to Kumo, however, we'll have a much tougher job ahead of us. The man stopped for a moment as an idea flashed through his mind. If he was wrong, he would be wasting valuable time, but if he were correct. Kakashi, Asuma said quickly. You take the rest and tail the group. I have a hunch I'm going to look into, the Junin stated before jumping off into the forest to the north. Ino, Kakashi, Orochi, and Anko stared after him in wonder. The special Junin was the first to recover from the abrupt departure. What the hell is he thinking? She asked. Kakashi shrugged. He has an idea, it seems. Doesn't concern us since he wasn't originally part of the mission, the Junin replied, although he hoped it worked out like the Sarutobi clansman hoped. Get back into rank and we'll follow the patrol, he ordered. With a few more curious looks between Anko and Ino, the rest of the group fell back into their former search ranks, minus Asuma. Within moments, the clearing was empty again except for a strange-looking plant that had burrowed its way up through the ground. If one were to look at this plant closer, they would most assuredly say it looked like a large Venus flytrap. Slash dash 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 slash. As the kid still out? Fujin asked as the pair stopped for a short break. They had split from the Konoha patrol a few hours after they broke camp and were now about to cross over into the land of rice. Naruto, who Raijin had found was much more tolerable unconscious, was slung over the man's back. Still, the large shinobi laid the boy down and gave him a quick look over before answering his partner. Yeah, he's out of it. Fujin rested against the trunk of the large tree they were standing on. This mission has been strangely simple. If Konoha is so weak as to let one of their most prized bloodlines be stolen with no incident, then maybe you should recommend we invade again, the tall man suggested. Raijin took a deep breath as he considered this. Well, it's true this went well considering the last time we tried to take a bloodline from them, but I wouldn't count out that old man Hokage just yet. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small ration bar to chew on. I bet you anything that he's already figured out it was foul play, he just doesn't know which village it was. That's the best thing we have going for us. Yes, but like you said. Fujin adjusted his glasses enough that the sun reflected off of them in a very malevolent way. He is an old man. Soon he'll be dead, and then where will Konoha be? The son of the White Fang is there, but the Sannin are gone. Konoha is a paper tiger right now, that's why they pushed for peace with Suna. The burly Raijin nodded in agreement as he finished off his energy bar. Lifting Naruto back onto his shoulder, he motioned for them to leave. I didn't say Konoha would be a problem for an invasion force, I said they could be a problem for us if we just sit here. Focus on getting back to Kumo and avoiding that old snake in Oto. When we get back to the citadel, then we'll talk about war. With that, Raijin was launching himself forward into the next tree. Fujin nodded and leapt off after his leader with a snicker. At least the feared Sharingan wasn't in very good hands. They sent both of us in case this kid turned out to be more than a Junin could handle. What a pathetic waste of resources. He sighed and Raijin was inclined enough to chuckle. What neither Junin saw was Naruto's hand clench up enough to draw blood from his palm. The red liquid fell to the ground in drops, but most of it pooled in Naruto's hand. Raijin was still chuckling a bit when Naruto's knee drove itself into his face. The Junin was completely caught off guard by the sudden onslaught and dropped his human cargo. Naruto spun in the air and landed a few trees away. He was weaponless, lost, and disoriented, but he was free. Kid, that was a very dumb thing you just did, Raijin informed the genin as he felt at his nose. With nothing more than a small grimace, he snapped it back into place. Fujin stopped beside his partner and shot him a disapproving scowl. I thought you said he was out. Ha, like I wouldn't know how to fake being unconscious. Naruto snorted. Like you said, I'm the grandson of a Hokage. The auburn-haired Kumo nin laughed at Naruto's words. You've got me there, kid. My own stupidity. What will the guys back home say about me getting decked by a genin? Fujin chose to ignore Raijin's nonchalance rather than feed into it. You have to know you can't beat us, it would be a waste of time to try, the wind manipulator coolly stated. It would just lead to us doing far more damage to you than we had intended. Don't forget, we only need your eyes. Everything else is just window dressing. Don't be a fool. Me be a fool. You're the ones willing to risk starting another war just for a bloodline. Naruto fired back. And you think you can take Konoha? If you think you can beat my grandfather, then why don't you go back and try it? Naruto suggested. Raijin, who had been silent up until now, finally drew the attention of both shinobi back to him as he sighed. You heard all of that, huh? Now you really don't have a chance, kid. I was going to push for letting you live out your life inside of Kumo like a normal blind kid, but now you've just become privy to some serious information. Fujin, kill him. Both Fujin and Naruto gaped at the older man. Kill him. Fujin parroted. Don't we need him alive for a transplant? He asked. Like you said, we only need his eyes intact. A corpse works just as well as a living person, Raijin stated in a cold tone. To drive the point home, he said, or do you want the council to find out we were so loose with our tongues? A demotion would be the least of our worries. Realization dawned on the younger shinobi and he smirked. Just make sure his eyes aren't damaged, right? I think I can do that. Naruto didn't like the way this was going, not one bit. He had only meant to buy some time until Orochi could bring help, but instead of simply leading the pair around Fire Country he now had to fight for his life just because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Perfect. Fujin decided that he had waited long enough to draw the blonde brat's blood. Drawing on his own Kekkei Genkai, the pale Junin started to mold the air around him with his chakra. Kei's Hoipu. The so-called wind whip lanced out of Fujin's hand like a living current of malevolent air. Naruto could only hear the rustling of the leaves around him as the invisible cord of chakra arched through the air. The genin dodged as best he could, but trying to avoid this jutsu was like trying to avoid air itself. Naruto gave a raspy last breath as the wind whip painfully constricted around his neck. If he didn't do something quickly, he would be suffocated. With his final breath of air, Naruto placed all his hopes on a long shot. Seniyashu. The shadow summons lanced out of Naruto's coat sleeves like multiple homing missiles. Fujin, clearly surprised at the sudden attack, was forced to release his jutsu and dodge the snakes as he was in no mood to get poisoned. Naruto fell to his knees as he took in wonderful oxygen yet again. Hey, you can't hold that jutsu when you're moving, huh? He asked as he finally got to his feet. Fujin scowled at the snakes that were retracting back into his opponent's coat. You know some strange jutsu, he stated, ignoring Naruto's critique of his own Kekkei Genkai. Why didn't you use that back when we first captured you? Not enough room, Naruto answered without hesitation. You're unlucky. Most of my jutsu work better when I have room to maneuver, he said as he started doing a string of hand seals. Raiden. Atsuen Ikazuki no Jutsu. Naruto barely had time to dodge the bolt of lightning that suddenly shot towards him. The tree he was standing on exploded in a shower of splinters that cut through his clothes and sliced up his arms and legs. Fujin raised an eyebrow at his partner's attack. I thought you said I could take care of this, he asked. Raijin didn't bother with a response and busied himself with scowling at the groan that came from the thick branch his target had fallen into. Hey, that's cheating, Naruto yelled as he pulled himself up from the leaf litter he had taken cover in. The Junin snorted. You are not a shinobi, he stated. When he saw Naruto's eyes start to burn with hatred, he waved his finger at the boy. No. See, you say me attacking you isn't fair and you're even getting mad at me for it. This isn't a game, kid. You foolishly gave away the small advantage you might have had by telling us what your specialty is. Do you really think I'd let you charge up a jutsu now that I know that you use area of effect attacks? Don't be so dense. Naruto couldn't believe that he was so insignificant in the eyes of these Junin. Yeah, I might be dense but I'm still twice the ninja you are. If you don't even know what I'm talking about then you must really need my eyes because you're blind. Raijin took a closer look at the boy and laughed. I don't know what you're getting at, kid. You look perfectly fine, too. Where's the splinters from the tree? He asked himself. The reality of the situation came crashing down on him like a waterfall. Damn it, it's a bunchin. The Kumo nin yelled as he sent a kunai sailing through the laughing clone's forehead. As Raijin had expected, it exploded into a shower of water. Mizu bunchin. The kid used the dew in the trees to make a complete clone. I really screwed up this time. He had to laugh at the situation. Moments after he had called the kid a fake shinobi, he himself had fallen for one of the oldest tricks in the book. Fujin, however, didn't see anything funny about this turn of events. We have to follow him. If he gets back to Konoha there will be serious problems. Calm down. Raijin snapped. I'm willing to bet the kid hasn't been this far out before since the old Hokage would want to keep him on a short leash. Come on, we'll head him off. The two Kumo nin darted off into the woods oddly following the same path they were headed on earlier. Raijin smiled to himself. That kid would probably do just as he thought, he only hoped that they reached him before the master of the land did. After all, even dying was preferable to being caught by that sleeping snake in Oto. Naruto hoped the bunchin he left behind had done its job. As long as it slowed those two up for just a bit he might be able to make it to Otogakure and get some help. It was true that Oto and Konoha didn't have much in the way of a relationship, but surely they were better than Kumo. At least the going was easy for him. The thick forests of Fire Country made for simple traveling for shinobi experienced with tree climbing. Judging by the sun, Naruto figured he had been missing from Konoha for at least 10 or so hours, enough time for the Hokage to put some sort of team together. If the old man figured out what really happened, that is, Naruto reminded himself. Raijin and Fujin seemed very confident in their ability to fool Anbu from the small bits he had overheard the night before. Still, even if they didn't figure out he had been kidnapped, they would know he was missing. That would entail sending out inquiries to nearby villages. When one showed up in Odo, he would just go back with them. Not the most foolproof plan, but it was the best he could come up with. His captors would undoubtedly search the way back to Konoha first, giving him much needed time to get well into Odo. Several miles up ahead of him, another group of young people were having problems of their own. Not life or death problems. Oh no, it was something far more serious to people their age. Boredom. Can we get the hell out of here yet? A tomboyish redhead asked as she replaced yet another proximity trap. These damn things don't need to be replaced every other day. The person she was talking to shook his head. The motion caused his ponytail to flail about and almost hit another member of their team in the face. No, we can't. You know as well as I do that we're the only available team to patrol today. Everyone else is out training for the invasion. The teen standing behind the ponytail boy snickered at the girl's attitude. What's the rush? It's not like you have a social life or anything, Tayuya. Go screw yourself, Sakin, Tayuya shot back. At least I don't cross-dress on the weekends with my little brother. Do the Johns have to pay extra for him? Enough. The ponytail boy cried out before one of his teammates could kill the other. The sooner we get this finished with, the sooner we can all get on with our day, got it? He ordered. Sakin turned back to the other boy. Since when are you the leader, Kidomaru? I don't remember that being discussed anywhere, the older boy snapped. Tayuya rolled her eyes at the new fit of bickering. Kidomaru scolds her about it and there he goes getting caught up with the drag queen himself, real mature. I'm going to go actually patrol something, you guys do whatever the hell you want, she called out. No one seemed to pay her any attention as Sakin and Kidomaru were about to come to blows while the last member of their team, Jirobu, was trying to play peacemaker. He acted more like a woman than she herself did, Tayuya mused as she walked off. The redhead took her time leaping around the rocky terrain on Odo's shared border with Konoha. Compared to the rest of Odo, which was rather flat and barren, being able to transverse the small mountain range was a bit of a treat. There were even 2 crazy statues around here that were made decades ago. Something about the first Hokage of Konoha and his friend. It wasn't important to Tayuya, not like Konoha would be around much longer anyway. Finally making it up to the top of the Fist Hokage's stone head, Tayuya sat down to take a break. The sun was out, the birds were singing, there was a weird blonde kid running out of the woods below her, the waterfall was producing such a comforting sound, and the breeze was, blonde kid. What the hell? Tayuya said to herself as she jumped to her feet. Her eyes weren't playing tricks on her, it seemed, as there was indeed a kid around her age dressed in green camo print pants and a vest was just running out of the thick forest on Konoha's side of the valley. From her vantage point, she watched as he scouted around and, after he seemed to think he was alone, walked over to the river below to get a drink of water. Too bad for him I'm here, the red-headed Odo nin thought to herself. Here was someone that seemed to have a little bit of training snooping around the border of Odo, a perfect excuse to let off a little steam. With the promise of at least an interesting fight in mind, Tayuya lifted a small wooden flute to her lips and started playing. Naruto finally allowed himself a small respite at the border of Odo. He had been traveling for the better part of the morning without any sign of his would-be captors and the boy decided he was due a small break. With the statue of the first Hokage looming over him, he couldn't help but shiver at the name of the place he was in. The Valley of the End. Huh, won't be my end, Naruto stated defiantly to himself. After being kidnapped, interrogated, threatened, chased, and driven out of his own country by his pursuers, the blonde wondered if there was anything else that could happen to him. When he watched the ground around him snake up and grasp his neck, Naruto knew he had just thought the magic words. Genjutsu. Naruto's mind screamed at him and immediately his Sharingan flared to life. From his initial assessment, the Konoha genin could tell that whoever was using this jutsu knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't very high level, only a containment skill, but it was executed flawlessly. However, unfortunately for whoever was using the jutsu, Naruto was her worst opponent as his eyes saw right through the attack. The boy traced the chakra trail from his own chakra coils and followed it up the side of the first Hokage statue with his eyes. There, standing at the top like a red beacon, was his attacker. From her vantage point high above, Tayuya frowned. Her target, who was supposed to be thinking he was being strangled, was instead staring right at her as if nothing was wrong. She knew that the long period of no missions ordered by Orochimaru in preparation for the invasion had made her somewhat rusty, but it shouldn't be this profound. What the hell? She asked no one in particular. Oh well, she would just have to try something a bit stronger. With that, she began a new song and didn't use her chakra to dull the sound of her playing. The rapid tempo of the movements floated down towards the unsuspecting Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened as a much thicker tendril of chakra came at him. Its wavy pattern shot through the air as fast as sound and, as it turned out, that was the chakra's conduit. Naruto heard the music and would have found it beautiful if it hadn't have been for the alarming situation he found himself in. The level of genjutsu this girl, he caught a glimpse of her hair when he saw her, was using far exceeded anything Kakashi had taught him. Guy, who focused more on taijutsu and weapons, was never one to go over it very much either, so Naruto found himself at a disadvantage. Although he knew he was in an illusion, even though he could see the chakra around him, the jutsu held firm even with his Sharingan illuminating it. Wires held the unfortunate genin up off the ground while the bones below him started to hiss and melt. Acid, Naruto thought with rising panic. Caught under the spell of the genjutsu, Naruto thrashed about trying to free himself from the wires even as the acid below him started to eat away at his sandals. Naruto began to scream as the imaginary acid started on his feet. The genjutsu was real enough to trick the boy's brain into thinking that there was real pain, much to Tayuya's delight. The redhead smirked as much as she was able while she played. A person screaming in pain was almost as pleasing to her ears as the deadly music she produced. When the acid was up to his knees, Naruto's throat was too raw to yell anymore. He endured in silence as he started to feel lightheaded. The pain was becoming too much for his conscious mind to take. On that edge of darkness and torment, something pricked his senses. Something buried so deep in his psyche that he wasn't sure if it was even real or not. So, you finally found me, a voice boomed in his mind. Instantly, Naruto found himself in a dark room. The only lighting at all was a row of candles on either side that led up to what looked like a throne at the back. The boy stood on shaky legs and wondered just what had happened. Am I still alive? Naruto wondered in awe. He looked at his feet to see that they were still there and was happy to find he could move around once again. Now that his mind was somewhat clear, the blonde boy kicked himself for falling so completely into a genjutsu. She was too good for me. He lamented as he looked around, trying to see the strange chair at the back of the room. The genin could see some sort of figure sitting on the throne, but he couldn't make out more than a single hand gripping the armrest. That hand, as if awoken by Naruto's interest, rose up in motion for the boy to come nearer. Naruto, ever wary but really having no better options available, slowly made his way closer to the back. Once he was about halfway to the throne, he stopped. Who are you? The Konoha nin demanded. The figure chuckled. It was an evil, malevolent chuckle that could only have came from the very pits of hell, Naruto decided. I am someone who wishes for you to live past this moment in your life, came the response to Naruto's inquiry. The boy mulled this over for a moment. On the one hand, he really didn't want to die. Especially not by the hand of some random kunoichi having a bad day. On the other, Naruto wasn't one to just randomly listen to strange delusions. I am not a delusion, the figure stated as if Naruto had spoken his words as clear as day. He can read my mind. Naruto thought in disbelief. Okay, so he couldn't think, talk, or leave. Just perfect. The person shrouded by the darkness smiled to himself. This child wasn't as talented as his chosen vessel, but with a little work he could still be a very valuable resource. That end result was more than enough incentive for this little visit. Listen to me, child, the creature called out. He was a busy deity and couldn't waste all day listening to this child rant about a thing as piddling as telepathy. You are going to die without my help. That is a fact. I can save you, but you'll owe me a favor. Decide. Live or die. Naruto's mental ramblings came to a crashing halt when the ultimatum was given. There really was no decision to be made. While Naruto was still dubious about this phantom's ability to actually help, it was better than rolling over and dying. Still, the genin wanted to know one thing. What favor? He asked with a raised eyebrow. In the darkness, the being smirked. You will know what it is when I ask. Now, choose, he demanded. Ever so slowly, Naruto reluctantly nodded. He was between a rock and a hard place, it seemed. After all, this was probably just a hallucination his mind had come up with once he had passed out from the pain of his flesh being melted by the genjutsu. The being sitting on the throne merely snapped his fingers. Immediately, Naruto felt a warm sensation coming from his inner coil system. It was chakra, his mind told him. A very pure, powerful form of chakra. He could feel it moving through his system until it came to rest behind his eyes. A sharp pain cut through Naruto's curious mindset and the boy dropped to his knees. As his vision started to blur and he lost consciousness for the second time that day, Naruto watched two twin glowing eyes staring at him from the darkness. So it is done, the voice boomed once Naruto had been returned to his own body. That boy will prove to be very useful in the coming years leading to my resurrection. I'm sure you agree with me, yes. The creature turned in his seat to look at a point behind the throne. There, chained to the very walls of the room, was a glowing fox that looked positively murderous. Slash dash 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 slash. Well, that one didn't last long, Tayuya grumbled as she hopped down from the shoddy's statue towards her unconscious opponent. I thought he would at least try and run or something when my first one didn't do anything. I'm too imposing for my own good, the redhead laughed. Still, she briefly wondered why her initial attack didn't so much as phase the obvious genin. Oh well, she could just ask Orochimaru once she got back to Oto. Now all that was left was to finish him off with a quick throat cut. Naruto was up before Tayuya got her kunai out. Caught off guard, the kunoichi could offer no defense as the boy instinctively lashed out at her with his foot. The hit sent her head snapping back with such force that the rest of her body followed her into the air. Still, she was one of Orochimaru's bodyguards and wasn't helpless for very long. She landed with the grace of a cat and the snarl of a wolf. Bastard! She cried out in frustration. Naruto was too busy trying to get his bearings and didn't press his lucky shot. Something felt different, but the boy just couldn't put his finger on it. Still, he was alive and that's all Naruto could have hoped to ask for at the moment. I'm here to get some help. I'm not a spy or anything, he exclaimed after he put a little distance between Tayuya and himself. Even though the girl didn't look like the close-range type, he had been outclassed far too much in their first encounter to take any chances. Tayuya rubbed the side of her face and ignored the statement. Damn it. If this leaves a welt, that gay freak will never shut up about it, she hissed. You're going to pay for that, fag. She yelled at Naruto. Naruto seemed to realize that this girl wasn't going to listen to reason until she had no choice. Resigning himself to this, he dropped into a loose taijutsu stance. It would also be a good opportunity to see exactly what kind of power he had after that thing tampered with him. Naruto didn't even want to think about the implication that whatever that thing was had been real. The two squared off against each other with the roaring waterfall serving as a fitting backdrop. Tayuya already had her flute out and was gathering chakra for the same attack that had floored her annoying opponent earlier. If that didn't work, she still had hundreds of genjutsu she could use with the first stage of her cursed seal. The thought that no matter what, she would see the blonde's broken body laying at her feet, was more than enough compensation for Sakin taking a few verbal jabs at her face. See, I told you he would be here. Naruto and Tayuya immediately ended their staring contest to turn towards the voices. There, sitting on one of the larger rocks in the valley, was the last person Naruto wanted to see. Fujin, who was content to lean beside the rock Raijin was laying on, sneered at the two children. Yes, you were right that he would head towards Oto. Although, it seems he did find some help, he stated, pointing at Tayuya. The redhead mentally groaned. This was getting far too complicated. All she wanted to do was kick the crap out of this annoying little worm of a Konoha nin, not fight his entire village. That would come in a few weeks. What the fuck do you two want? This is between me and this brat, she yelled, far too annoyed to watch her language. Not that she ever did anyway. Raijin laughed as he pushed his brown hair out of his eyes. What we want is that kid dead. If you do that for us, it just saves us some time. Like hell I'm going to die. Naruto yelled back in defiance. He felt something stirring in his head, but before he could pin the feeling down, Raijin whistled. The Kumo Junin had to laugh at the situation. Would you look at that? The kid got his second stage Sharingan from all this running around, he said to his partner. He was loud enough for Tayuya to overhear, however, and the Oto nin turned on the boy with an incredulous look. You're a damned Uchiha, she yelled in disbelief. No wonder that weak jutsu she had started with didn't work, he could see right through it. Naruto was even more surprised. This was the power he had gained. His mood was darkened by the fact he had blindly been forced into doing a favor for whatever it was that helped him. This kind of present wouldn't come with a small price tag. Raijin. The boy has become dangerous, Fujin stated as he pushed his glasses back up his nose. We have to deal with him and the girl since she's seen us. Tayuya narrowed her eyes at the challenge. Just try it, trash. I'll rip your fucking spines out. Naruto, seeing all of his enemies' attention on each other, made a break for the tree line in an attempt to elude capture. He knew where he was now. The Valley of the End was a famous landmark. If he hurried, he could make it back to Konoha before nightfall. The only thing that kept Naruto's head still on his shoulders was his new Sharingan. Instead of cutting through bone and flesh, Fujin's wind whip only cut a very long scar across Naruto's chest. The genin staggered back as he had not expected such a fast response. When he looked up, Naruto saw the reason for this. Going somewhere, Naruto? Fujin asked as he stepped out of the very tree line Naruto was headed towards. In disbelief, Naruto looked behind him to where Raijin was sitting in time to see dust settle where Fujin had once been. Just how fast would the Kumo nin have to be? Naruto's thoughts were cut short by Fujin charging up yet another wind whip. This time, there was nowhere to go, no trees to hide behind, and no second chances. Seemingly sensing the same finality, Fujin chuckled. This is it. Your eyes now belong to Kumogakure, the bespectacled man said as he lifted his hand. Naruto could practically feel his neck start to go numb as the situation sunk in. Kei's Hoipu. Doden. Doryuheiki. The mud wall clashed violently with the Kekkei Genkei of Fujin. In that time, Naruto found himself lifted up and carried off to the side of the Shodai statue. The genin watched with silence as his rescuer patted him on the head and walked off towards the other shinobi. Raijin actually sat up from his rock while Fujin calmly walked around the battered wall of mud. Tayuya, who was now between two Kumo nin and this newcomer, started to finger her flute with unease. That was an impressive jutsu, Fujin stated in a level tone. Inside, the young Junin was anything but composed as he seethed at having been denied his revenge for his earlier embarrassment. Naruto's savior merely looked over at the speaker with a small smile but didn't respond. Raijin dusted his pants off and hopped down from his rocky perch. Well, this is complicated, he said while he cracked his knuckles. You saw through our escape that fast, huh? I would expect nothing less from Sarutobi Asuma. Now, about our business here, what do you make of it? He asked. A tense atmosphere settled over the valley when Asuma didn't immediately reply. Tayuya watched the two Kumo nin but kept most of her attention on Naruto. She still had a score to settle with that kid for landing a lucky hit. Naruto watched his uncle stare down Raijin. The boy had no doubt that the seasoned Junin could handle anyone from Kumo, but if Fujin were to attack from behind there could be trouble. Naruto forced himself to stand. He would have to keep the other Junin busy until Asuma could help. Asuma's eyes took in each party standing around him. There was a girl who was obviously from Odo if the way she dressed was any indication. Shinobi from that new village were particularly fond of darker colors and eyeshadow. The two Kumo nins were probably going to double team him, and from what he had already seen at least one of them had an advanced bloodline. Then there was Naruto himself. The cut on his chest was more superficial than life-threatening, but it was still an injury. At least this little escapade had pushed him into another stage of his Sharingan. This business. Asuma let his cigarette fall from his hands. Is better off without you, he stated to the Kumo Junin in front of him as he crushed the still smoldering embers from his cigarette underfoot. Deep in the forests of Konoha, Patrol number 32 was just finishing their run on the border of Fire Country. They were about to start making their way back to Konoha when their commander paused mid-leap. With a very subtle motion, he made a small sign to the rest of his troop. They were being followed. The other shinobi didn't make any outward signs of acknowledgement, but their leader knew he got his point across. All that was left was to wait for whomever it was following them to make themselves known. Orochi was the first to note a change in the patrol's activities. Human, I can smell the patrol up ahead, the serpent-turned boy stated in a whisper to Kakashi, but they are not moving like they were before. Their leader paused her for a few moments. Orochi pointed to the branch he was standing on. The Junin narrowed his visible eye. The patrol could have stopped simply because someone dropped something. On the other hand, they could have been laying a trap. Look what I found. Everyone turned to Anko as she pointed to a small paper talisman which Ino was about to step on. Blondie was almost blown to bits, the purple-haired woman chuckled. Ino nearly lost her footing when she looked at what she had almost stepped on. While it wasn't too powerful, the exploding tag would have definitely maimed her. Thanks, Mitarashi-san, Ino stuttered. The older woman snorted. If you had triggered it, you would have started yelling about your leg being blown off. I just didn't want our position to be given away, Anko stated, much to Ino's ire. Kakashi, however, wasn't paying attention. His mind was grinding over the possible paths they could take. They were found out, that much was certain. The patrol was at least a few hundred yards in front of them, seemingly making their rounds, so it was obvious that they were waiting on their pursuers to make the first move. Well, why not? Might as well get this over with, the Junin thought to himself. Anko and Ino, with the later still glaring at the former, were both surprised when Kakashi suddenly got to his feet and hopped down out of the tree they were hidden into the forest floor below. The Junin knew that if the wrong sort of commander was leading this patrol he could very well die. Kakashi was playing a hunch and he hoped to everything sacred that it worked out. The chance to find Naruto, however, was more than enough motivation to make him this reckless. After a few tense moments of walking, Kakashi stopped where he believed the patrol to be hiding. The trees were thick in this area and even with his seasoned training the one-eyed Junin couldn't spot even one of the patrol. Whoever is in charge here knows their stuff, he mused. Oh well, time to get this over with. This is Hitaki Kakashi. I know there is a Konoha patrol here and yes, we have been following you for the better part of a day. I need to speak with your commander. It's a matter of great importance to the Hokage, the Junin called out. Now he would have to wait. If his hunch didn't carry water, then he should be dying any second now. A few yards ahead, a tall figure dropped out of the trees. With most of the sunlight blocked, Kakashi couldn't make out much of the man's features. The figure stepped forward a few feet but avoided any stray rays of light to hide his face. When he was within 10 meters of Kakashi, he stopped. Do you have any proof that you are who you claim to be? The man asked. Kakashi smiled under his mask. This was actually the easy part. In a slow motion, as to not give his audience any cause to be suspicious, the Junin pulled up his Hades 8 to expose his Sharingan. The red iris glowed in the dark as the tome focused on the patrol commander. That good enough? Kakashi asked. Ibiki. Ibiki. Came a shout from behind the two men. The larger man winced when the form of his friend, Mitarashi Anko, nearly took off his head with a kunai. It was all in good fun, though, he hoped. Anko stormed over to the larger man as Ino and Orochi cautiously dropped from their perches. The annoyed Special Junin angrily waved her arms around and Kakashi would have laughed if their mission wasn't so important. I'll get right to it, Kakashi started before Anko could. Have you seen anything suspicious on this patrol at all? He asked. Ibiki reluctantly took his eyes off of the kunai Anko was still holding and tried to come up with something. Finally, he shook his head. Nothing at all, it's been very quiet. Why do you ask? Kakashi cursed under his breath. If someone like Ibiki said nothing happened, then they probably weren't even aware they were being followed. What was more disturbing was that whoever these Kumo-nin were, they were skilled enough to avoid detection by one of the best trackers Konoha had. Uzumaki Naruto has been abducted, he said in response to Ibiki's question. We trailed his abductors until they started to follow your patrol towards the border with Kumo. Ibiki looked disturbed at that. Someone was following them so long without him knowing. Wait, Kumo. Someone from Kumo abducted the Hokage's grandson. Kakashi ignored the man for the time being as he motioned for his group to huddle. When everyone was listening, the Junin started making drawings on the forest floor. Okay, this is where we are. He drew a little outline of the fire country, and this is where the Kumo-nin need to get Naruto to. He drew another outline of the border of Kumo. There were 3 countries that they could go through to get to Kumo, the rest of the group noticed. So, which one did they go through? Ino asked as she motioned to the 3 countries. Well, they didn't go through here, Kakashi said as he pointed to farthest expanse of the small country above Konoha, because if they did, Ibiki would have been sure to notice them like he did us. That means they either went through Odo and looped around, he pointed to the center block of land that they had passed to get to where they were, or we missed them completely and they got on a boat in Takigakure and went that way. Anko studied the crudely drawn map and snapped her fingers. Asuma said he had a hunch, right? Where was that camp this morning? She asked. Kakashi blinked and after a second of thinking, he pointed to a spot a few miles south of Odo. Anko grinned and made a line from that point, through Odo, into Kumo. And Asuma went north into Odo. That means he thought they went straight through Odo and went into Kumo that way. She exclaimed. The others looked among themselves then finally at Kakashi. The Junin scratched his head as he stared at the map. Well, that's the only other way they could have gone and made it to Kumo quickly, he admitted. Good work, Anko. Let's backtrack to the border with Odo and follow Asuma. Ibiki watched the group disappear into multiple blurs as they set out to parts unknown. Well, that was a bit rude. They didn't even say goodbye, he mumbled. Oh well, if it came to that Naruto kid he knew Anko wasn't going to waste time with him. Besides, it wasn't any of his business. He still had to lead a group through the rest of their patrol. There was also the little matter of the laxness of his team to straighten out if they couldn't even tell someone was tailing them for so long. Oh yeah, he would have to be extra tough on them now. Somewhere up in the treetops, 3 unfortunate Chunin shivered for reasons they couldn't comprehend at the time. Slash dash 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 slash. Other than the roar of the waterfall, it was entirely too quiet at the valley of the end. There were no birds singing, no frogs croaking, no anything. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the fight that was soon to take place. On the flat plain behind the famous waterfall, 5 figures stared each other down. The tall, lean form of the Kumo Junin Raijin stood in stark contrast to the seemingly placid Sarutobi Asuma. Behind them, a young blonde genin dressed in green camouflage warily watched a man in a formal kimono with long hair and glasses. Further down from the boy, a red-headed girl in a Taoist robe watched the entire scene through narrowed eyes. From the way she was splitting her attention between the blonde boy and the man with glasses, it was easy to tell she didn't know who exactly she should be fighting. Tayuya didn't have much time to be indecisive since Raijin, having never been one for pre-fight dramatics, rushed towards Asuma in a sudden blitz. The Konoha Junin reciprocated in kind and the 2 men practically flew at each other like dueling bulls bent on murder. Naruto looked away from his opponent when he heard Raijin's war cry. This proved too good an opportunity for Fujin to pass up and the Kumo nin started running through hand seals. Fuden. Shinku Yokoana no Jutsu. Naruto felt the tug of the air currents too late to mount any kind of defense. The vacuum tunnel did its job and sucked Naruto towards a large rock jutting up from the ragged terrain. Tayuya almost winced when Naruto crashed into the stone pillar with enough force to crack it. Almost. Not like it wasn't the bastard's own fault for not paying attention, she mentally snickered. However, now that the blonde idiot was out of the fight for a bit, Fujin turned towards the redhead. She was a witness, after all, and there could be no outside parties left alive in this affair. Miss, he called out, if you would just come over here for a moment you would save me a bit of time chasing you down. You wish, prick. Tayuya yelled back. Oh well, she needed to relieve some tension anyway, and since her original target was already out of the fray, this little pretty boy would have to play stand-in. Fujin watched with a calculated calmness as Tayuya started to play her flute. Seems she would be doing this the hard and messy way. Fine with me, the Junin told himself as he started to gather chakra. Tayuya selected one of her more disturbing genjutsu to start with. Since this little fag had no deus ex machina keke genkai, the effect would be much greater. To her immense agitation, however, her opponent didn't seem bothered in the least. She didn't have long to ponder this strange turn of events because Fujin was already on the attack. Deciding to take a more direct approach to slaughter since Tayuya didn't seem to be much of a threat, the Junin produced a kunai from his robes and charged towards the shocked Oto Nin. To his surprise, Tayuya blocked his thrust with her flute. Now that he was closer, Fujin noticed that the instrument was made of metal and looked as if it had been through a fair number of fights. His attention almost lapsed too long, however. The redhead countered with a strong left hook that made Fujin's arm rattle when he barely blocked it with his free hand. This girl had much more power than he had given her credit for. Her muscles were built up in a way that only experienced combat nin would ever achieve. If Tayuya were just a bit more experienced, Fujin estimated she would have beat him in the first few moments, as he had made a grievous mistake by underestimating his opponent. As it was, the older Junin managed to tip Tayuya off balance and retreat backwards several yards before coming to a stop. Well, he started, it would seem I'm hunting a tiger instead of a pussycat this time. Fujin sneered at the unconscious form of Naruto. Shut the hell up with that shit, Tayuya snapped. The kunoichi was far from being in a good mood. Not only did her genjutsu not work on this guy for some reason, she had also squandered an opportunity to end this fight quickly if she hadn't been still recovering from the initial outrage that her signature jutsus were once again ineffective. The back of her neck started to burn as she called upon one of her trump cards. Doesn't matter if you can block genjutsu or not, fag. This time you're going to die. Fujin's eyebrow raised a fraction when he felt a surge of chakra come from the kunoichi before him. Small black tattoos started to snake around her body as the feeling increased. It wasn't regular chakra, however, but a more malevolent force that was only for one thing, war. Asuma risked turning away from his opponent for a moment to study the girl. What he saw gave him pause. A cursed seal, he deduced. So, Orochimaru was lurking around somewhere nearby. That gave the Junin no sense of security whatsoever. Raijin also paused his rush to glance at the redhead. She had that much in reserve. He growled. Just their luck that the blonde brat would run right into one of Oto's elite forces. I don't have time to play kiddie games with you, Leaf Man. I'll end this right now. Leaping back, the Kumo Nin raised his hands out in front of him to gather chakra. Asuma watched with a calculating eye as sparks started to fly in the air around him. There were even some sparks erupting from the ground itself. Obviously some form of Raiden, the Junin surmised. Unfortunately for the other nin, Asuma had no wish to drag this out into a jutsu-pissing match like most of the younger generation liked to do. Bad move letting me know what element you'll be using, Asuma stated as he started a set of hand seals. This is the fate of those that attack the leaf, that attack my family. Futon. Tikiatsu Misairu no Jutsu. Raijin bared his teeth in annoyance as he literally watched the chakra around the other Junin lance into the air in long, graceful threads. It would have been almost beautiful had he not realized exactly what was going to happen to him. In the sky above the two, sinister-looking clouds were beginning to gather. Their dark intent was shown full force as a cyclone burst from their depths and descended upon the Kumo Junin. Asuma watched with a merciless gaze as Raijin was devoured by the massive tornado. The cyclone missile skill, Asuma explained out of habit, is very simple. You do not create the weather, only influence it subtly with your chakra. I hope this loss shows Kumogakure that Konoha is not so weak as to allow the kidnapping of one of its own. With his sentiments said, Asuma turned to walk towards the downed Naruto. He checked the genin over for any serious injuries and, upon finding none, Asuma restored the boy's consciousness with a bottle of smelling salts pulled from his vest. Naruto, can you hear me? Asuma asked as the boy slowly opened his eyes. Ouch! What the hell hit me? Naruto groaned as Asuma helped him sit up. Once up, the boy proceeded to blink his eyes rapidly to fully bring back their clarity, and it was then Asuma noticed something new. I was right. That is the second stage of the Sharingan, the Junin stated, pleased by this turn of events. That's very good. Naruto finally took notice of the person standing above him and couldn't help the surprised look that sprang to his face. Asuma, why are you out here? He asked, ignoring the Sharingan comment since he was already aware of his new abilities. It was Asuma's turn to be caught off guard. The Junin coughed and mumbled something about being sent on a rescue mission when a rumbling from behind cut him off. With a shocked yelp of surprise, Asuma was hit solidly by a rocky fist that sent him flying into the forest several meters away with enough force that he broke a few trees on the way in. Naruto yelled after him, but he too was silenced when the same fist of stone grabbed him by the neck. So, that guy thought a little bad weather was enough to get rid of me, Raijin za Genzonchi. Not too bright. Naruto managed to force his neck to strain upwards, and what he saw made him gasp. Raijin was clad in what looked like a full suit of stone armor complete with face covering. When he breathed, the stone moved with his body, it was as if it were part of his skin. The older man must have seen the disbelief in Naruto's eyes as he laughed, the sound coming out of his stone mask as rough and ragged as his new body. Surprised. This is my power. My Kekkei Genkai. He boasted. I can use the very power of lighting to create a magnetic field around my body and draw in certain minerals. No one has ever beaten my absolute defense, Raijin boldly stated. With the tensing of his hand, Naruto choked and gagged. And you have to die. Sorry, kid. It was fun while it lasted, the man stated with something akin to regret in his voice as he slowly squeezed the life out of Naruto. Kuchio's no jutsu. Enma. Raijin's head whipped around to where he had supposedly sent Asuma to his death. Quicker than either the Junin or Naruto could see, a long black pole crashed into the Kumo nin's forehead with a sickening crack. The massive golem was sent sprawling and was forced to relinquish his hold on Naruto. Said Genin coughed and hacked as his lungs again filled with sweet oxygen. That's it. Enough with painless, quick, deaths for you people. Raijin snarled as he rose to his feet. When he saw who was now walking towards him out of the forest, what little of his skin one could see paled. So, it was you all along, Raijin stated with stunned silence. Naruto too looked up at his savior only to be left in much the same state as Raijin. Oh Ojiazan. Walking from the tree line in his classic black shinobi uniform was the most recognizable icon in the hidden village of the Leaf. Sarutobi looked over to his grandson and smiled, pleased that the boy didn't seem too injured from that last attack. Are you alright? He asked, still keeping his eyes on Raijin. Enma, in the form of the Nioibo, was resting on his shoulder. Go help the young lady against the other one, although I don't think she really needs the help. After that, we'll take you back home, alright? Naruto nodded at the order and jumped back up to his feet to go help Tayuya. Raijin made a motion to stop the boy, but his outstretched hand was quickly swatted away with a vicious strike from the Nioibo. As I said before, your business is with me, the old man stated with perfect calm. The Kumo nin frowned behind his stone helmet, now he had to fight the Hokage himself. Oh well, from what he had heard this old man didn't even have a special bloodline, so he shouldn't be too much of a problem. Probably got the title out of respect for his younger days. Are you sure you want to do this, old man? Just give me the kid and you don't damage your reputation, explained Raijin in one last attempt at an easy outcome. Sarutobi smirked. My reputation. Things as trivial and superficial as that don't matter at all. What I care about, what I value, is the drive and ambition of those I protect. The old man gave a sidelong glance at Naruto retreating form before his smirk turned into a soft smile. If my reputation would give any of them a single extra day to achieve their dreams and find happiness, I would gladly give it. Raijin shook his head. One child over the stability of your village, great Hokage indeed, he laughed. Fine then. I'll do your village a favor by killing you. Then they can elect someone who knows what the price of a single life is. With all the words between them said, Raijin rushed to the offense. His massive body was surprisingly fast and the aged Hokage had to put some effort into dodging. Raijin sensed this and pressed his attack. When the old man finally blocked a punch with the Nioibo, he struck out with his other hand and grabbed the staff. Raiden. Denryu no Jutsu. Enma yelled in pain as the current flowed through him to get to the Hokage. Unlike his summon, however, the elder Sarutobi gritted his teeth and kept his feet firmly planted to the soil to ground himself. The bellow of Enma caught Naruto's attention as the genin ran towards Tayuya and Fujin. He turned on his heels and his reddish eyes widened in shock as he actually watched the chakra-converted lighting run through his grandfather. He wanted to do something, anything, but his body was beaten and sore from the abuse he had suffered from Fujin's first attack. Worthless coward. Something inside of him yelled. Naruto shook his head in response to the voice. That's a Junin, I'm just a genin. I'll be killed. Spineless, the voice sneered back. Pathetic. No wonder your parents left you, they knew you would be weak. I'm not weak. I'm the top of my class, people respect what I've done. Naruto yelled back into the depths of his mind. The voice merely laughed at Naruto's declaration. Top of your class, the voice repeated in a disgusted tone. Humans resent you for that. They respect you for action. You deserve no respect. Cur. Look how quickly you fled from the battle. A very respectable human, indeed. When the boy stayed silent, the voice tried another approach. What would that female think if she saw you now? The one with purple hair, asked the voice. Would she coddle you like a child and try to shield you from the real world all the while cursing you in her mind for being such a worthless, spineless, cowardly kid, or would she just kill you to save herself a future hassle? After all, she must be disgusted by having a child follow her around constantly. Naruto's breathing started to get ragged as the scenario of Anko leaving him for dead played over and over in his mind. It was so real that the genin could almost hear her words blaming him for being so weak and worthless. Sensing victory, the voice continued with, and the other female, the one with blonde hair, she will only see what you really are. What could she have possibly been thinking choosing you as a rival? What could your teammates have possibly seen in you? Someone that won't be dependable, independent, always needing direction from others. Just like a child. Ino, Tenten, Lee, Guy Sensei, Ojiazan, O2G. Naruto heard them all accusing him in his mind. They were looming over him, all mutilated in some way, all saying it was a result of his slack. The most powerful voice, however, was the one not saying anything. The ghostly form of Anko simply stared at him with nothing but disgust in her eyes. I can't let this happen. The thud of the Hokage hitting the ground broke Naruto out of his breakdown. The old man's robes were smoking and there were stray patches of burnt flesh visible on his hands. Enma had dispelled from the voltage and now the third Hokage was weaponless. Something in Naruto finally snapped when Raijin lumbered towards the elderly man with a condescending chuckle. So, this is the limit of the Leaf, the giant laughed. One jutsu and you and your summoned animal are down. How has Leaf thrived for so long? Raijin shook his head in disgust. His own village had been held back by this Hokage during the Great War. He raised his rocky hand over the Hokage's head. I never did like history. He brought the heavy appendage down hard enough to split the ground. Missing the unique crunching sound someone usually ends up on his bad side, the Kumo Nin looked under his fist to confirm his suspicions that the old man had somehow managed to move out of the way. The old timer couldn't have gotten 2 FA. Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu. Raijin threw out his arms to catch himself as he was knocked off his feet by the giant ball of fire that had crashed into his back. The flames lapped at his sides as the heat started to transfer deeper and deeper into his suit of stone. He had to get out of the miniature hell his opponent had put him in. Tat. The Junin concentrated his chakra outward from his body and the pieces of his armor pushed back against the fireball as they left his body. The bonds of electricity arched out farther and farther until a wall of stone was erected keeping Raijin out of harm. That old man almost got me, Raijin bitterly thought. Kuchio's no jutsu. Jagomon. Raijin cursed as he felt a rumbling under his feet. A feint. He cried in mixture of disbelief and annoyance. He was airborne just in time to avoid being bitten by a rather large snake that had burst from the ground where he was standing. Its arrow-shaped head followed his movement before slithering back down into the hole it had created. Raijin quickly caught on to the serpent's game and he took to a more defensible position on top of a large rock. It'll be a cold day in Suna when I'm ambushed by a slithering pair of boots, old man. He called out in defiance. However, his opponent was already gone and the fire attack had ceased. Cautiously, Raijin scanned the area only to see an equally confused Sandaime Hokage doing the exact same thing. Sarutobi's eyes watched for any sign of movement. He had been saved, not that he had needed it, by someone that looked like his grandson. The only reason he was still doubtful as to who the boy really was is because of the look the genin had. It was one of pure, undiluted, bloodlust. His blood, the rage of the Uchiha. The Hokage deduced with a start. It was the first time Naruto had displayed the severely psychotic traits of his clan. There will be no getting him out of it, the old man mentally sighed. He will have to calm himself down, I can do nothing for him. Raijin narrowed his eyes at the Hokage. If the old man wasn't attacking, then who was? He's almost gotten me twice already, must be reinforcements, the Junin decided. Calling upon his Kekkei Genkai, the Kumo Nin started to resummon his stone armor in preparation for another assault. However, an added bonus of putting out so much chakra was that anyone with any experience would be able to feel other chakra sources moving through his own field. It was with this ability that the Junin turned abruptly and slammed his elbow into Naruto's jaw as the genin tried to ambush him from behind. Naruto let out a loud grunt as the impact broke a tooth and violently sent him flying into the river feeding the grand waterfall the valley was famous for. Fighting against the current, Naruto managed to pull himself up onto the surface of the water although keeping in one spot while a strong current wanted to pull him was difficult. You, snarled the man. Kid, you don't know when you're beat, do you? What will it take for you to simply roll over and die? The blonde narrowed his eyes in such a way it made Raijin almost take a step back. The boy was releasing a fair amount of killing intent as well. Your life, the blonde stated in a dark, malevolent tone. His red eyes flashed dangerously as the two-tome in each pupil began to spin rapidly. And I'm going to take it from you myself. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. 10 water clones rose from the crystal clear current and formed a line adjacent to the real genin. They all started to run though hand seals as the last piece of Raijin's magnetic stone armor grafted to his skin. The Junin narrowed his eyes when the Narutos hunched down on all fours and grew fangs and claws. He remembered the Shikyaku no Jutsu from the original abduction and it was the only thing that had caught him off guard. Not this time, however. The real Naruto made the first move. Like a pack of wolves, the Mizu Bunshins ran towards Raijin. The stone golem jumped off his rock and charged the coming wave as well. With his hard shell, the serpent summon would not be able to bite him. One of the clones broke off from the pack and started to run a wide circle around the giant while the rest charged head-on. Raijin's armored hand came at the clones with a surprising swiftness and easily crushed the first clone it hit. The others, however, were not deterred in the least by their comrade's demise and scampered all around the Junin clawing with chakra-enhanced claws. The original Naruto, who had set off to hit the Junin from behind, broke his beast jutsu and rose on 2 legs. As Raijin's titanic arm drew back to destroy another of his clones, Naruto struck. Seniyashu. The summoned snakes lanced out of Naruto's coat sleeve and easily captured the outstretched limb of Raijin. The giant was surprised to feel the new resistance and looked behind him to see Naruto pulling against him with all of his power. The remaining Mizu Bunshin were also clawing at his feet in order to topple the Junin. The Sandaime watched with surprise at the straightforwardness of his grandson. Never before had Naruto ever directed his mind towards a fight like this. Normally, the boy would simply play with his opponents or overthink things and misuse jutsu. Now Naruto was outmaneuvering a Junin. Even though the man had used up an incredible amount of chakra, he was still dangerous to a genin. The very ground shook when Raijin finally fell onto his back. The clones then all grabbed an appendage to keep the man down while Naruto darted towards the Shodai statue. Focusing all of his chakra into his feet, Naruto ran up the titanic stone monument at a shocking speed. Just when the boy reached the top of the statue, he launched himself backwards and gracefully glided over the battlefield. With nothing more than a cold glare, Naruto began the jutsu to end Raijin's life. Kaden. Karyu Enden. The doomed Junin watched helplessly as a massive wall of flames descended upon him as if they were a flaming judgment from hell itself. Even as the Mizu Bunshins around him instantly evaporated when the white-hot blast touched them, Raijin could only feel amazement and a tiny slither of pride. He had watched this little blonde kid go from a weak little brat to this person, this weapon, that was capable of such precision and efficiency. As the fires of the dragon flame finally touched his stone shell, the Kumo nin chuckled. That kid, what a guy, he thought as his body was literally baked alive inside his stone cocoon. Sarutobi's lips formed a thin line as he observed the last moments of Raijin. Even though the man was going to die either here or back in Konoha, the Hokage didn't want his grandson to be the executioner. The old man watched in silence as Naruto gracefully landed several meters away. Would he be back to normal now or would his bloodlust not be sated yet? For the first Naruto could remember, his mind felt complete. There was nothing else clouding his thoughts, it was like the edge of a kunai, sharp, accurate, and geared towards conflict. He watched his grandfather stare at him with a slight hint of worry that the genin didn't understand. What was there to fear now? He had done away with the one who would dare think to take him away from his family. It was then that a stray thought pierced the red haze in Naruto's mind. That's right, there was another piece of trash with that one. Of course grandfather would be disappointed that I let my guard down so quickly. I'll deal with that one as well. Almost immediately after a course of action was decided upon, Naruto became aware of the fight taking place on the other side of the river basin. That effeminate Kumo nin that had dared to touch him before was fighting against what looked to be 3 giants while the Oto Kunoichi played her flute. Naruto noted the strange new tattoos that had appeared on her body but disregarded them out of hand as nothing more than a side effect of some jutsu Yuya had used in the fight. What he did take note of was the large amount of chakra she was emitting. While impressive, it would not be enough to beat her opponent. Without so much as a second thought, he disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Fujin dodged another swipe from one of the giants facing him. If he had known this girl had a summoning jutsu, he would have ended the fight much sooner instead of dragging it out. What was even more vexing was that the girl was seemingly very intelligent. Every time he would try and use his Kekkei Genkai, the giant with twin shields would block his whip and the other 2 would close in on him. It would seem he would have to use that jutsu. Chiyuya smiled as she played her flute. No one had ever beaten the Doki except for Kimimaro, and even then he had been forced to use his cursed seal in order to avoid getting his chakra drained. It came as a surprise to her when Fujin suddenly leapt away from their battleground and retreated to a nearby outcropping of stone that jutted up from the dusty landscape. Very impressive, girl, Fujin praised, his voice as condescending as if he were addressing a child, but as impressive as a summoning jutsu is, it falls flat to the power that is a Kekkei Genkai. The redhead snorted as she lowered her flute from her pale lips. Talk all the shit you want, fag, she responded. You're the one that has been running around like a rat for the last few minutes. Fujin frowned at the smug smirk Tayuya was sporting. This girl was pleased with her success, was she? Is that a fact? Let's see how you deal with this then. The air around the Junin quickly started to gather and Tayuya rose her instrument in preparation to counter another wind whip, but that thought was quickly discarded as the wind chakra started to condense into a single point. She was even more disturbed when her hair started to flail around in a newly created breeze. This is the power of a genius, girl, Fujin bragged as he held out his hand. In his palm was a small, swirling ball of chakra. It was no bigger than a marble, but amazingly, everything around it started to lose its brightness. Even in broad daylight, all Tayuya could see of the ball was a dark blackness that she had never encountered before. It was unnerving to look upon. This, Fujin continued, is the limits of my power. It is nothing and everything at the same time. This is the power I have at my command. Taste the horror that you will find in the abyss. The terror of Ku. Tayuya's unease turned into something akin to fear as she watched the black orb grow in size. She didn't know what the jutsu would do, but Tayuya knew she didn't want to hang around and find out. She dropped her flute and ran as quickly as her legs would carry her towards the base of the second statue that formed half of the waterfall in the valley. Behind her, the Doki were left directionless without Tayuya's guidance and were quickly sucked into the ever-expanding void created by Fujin. Whatever the blackness touched was instantly lost forever, even light itself couldn't escape. The wind was now howling as more and more air was sucked into nothingness, and Tayuya could feel the burning in her legs as they protested the amount of chakra being siphoned into them to keep the kunoichi bolted to the ground and continuing onwards. Finally, she made it to the solid rock wall of the statue. Drawing a talisman from her robe, Tayuya slammed the slip of paper onto the stone and prayed it stayed stuck long enough for her jutsu to work. Shiden Fuan. The seal flared to life as the 4-point ceiling took effect. 4 lines of chakra snaked out from the paper and carved themselves into the stone Tayuya was pressing against. With a flare of her own chakra, the seal came to life and erected a small barrier between her and the ripping winds that would have surely sucked her into absolute nothingness. Around her, rocks were being pulled from the ground as the void ran its course. When the jutsu finally ceased, rocks feel like rain around the enormous, perfectly cylindrical, crater carved out by the void's power. With a pitiful grunt, Tayuya dropped her shield and fell to the ground in a heap as her own cursed seal snaked back into her neck. All of her chakra was depleted and she almost broke a tooth in rage as Fujin loomed over her. Of all the pathetic ways to die, she mumbled. Fujin smiled at her words as he pulled out a kunai to end Tayuya's life. It had been a long time since someone forced him to use the ku in a fight. Now, don't you wish you would have listened to me at the beginning and simply gave up? You could have spared me so much effort. Tayuya desperately wanted to work up enough strength to wipe that smirk off Fujin's face, but it seemed someone else had the same idea as Fujin was violently removed from where he was standing by a hard right hook. Tayuya strained her eyes up to look at her savior and almost wished she would have died rather than be saved by the person she saw. Naruto smiled in abject pleasure as he tensed his fist. He had been wanting to rip that smile off Fujin's face for the last 2 days, and it felt good to feel a few of the Junin's teeth break from the force of his hit. However, he didn't want to play with this man after seeing the kind of destruction Fujin could cause. You little bastard. Fujin yelled as he spit out a tooth. Raijin must be getting lax with his work ethic if you're still alive. Naruto paid the man no attention and went back on the offense immediately. There would be no exchange of wit, no trading jutsu, no back and forth, only blood. Fujin's frown turned into a growl of pure hate as he summoned his wind whip to cut the impudent brat to pieces. To his growing anger, the youth dodged by a sliver of space and descended upon him like a demon from hell. Fujin tried to put up some form of defense against the Uchiha's precision assault, but the combination of Naruto's newly found drive and the Kumo Nin's lack of chakra after his last attack left no room for a surprise comeback. With pitiless efficiency, Naruto broke the meager defenses of Fujin and landed solid hits on the Junin's abdomen. The long-haired Junin doubled over only to have his head driven back up by a knee to the face. Tayuya, who had finally gotten back to her feet, caught Naruto's eyes and an unspoken agreement was settled upon: vengeance. Tayuya moved in conjunction with Naruto as she began an assault against the wounded Junin. Now against 2 opponents, Fujin was completely overwhelmed. A shot from Naruto's left fist drove him into the elbow of Tayuya and his jaw broke with a sickening crack. The Oto Nin didn't let up as she savagely kicked the back of Fujin's knee while Naruto worked in consort with the other, driving the man down to his knees. Now that the tables were turned, the Kumo Nin's only thought was disbelief and shock. His mind couldn't take the stress and it broke like most geniuses do when they are bested. You. Fujin slurred through his broken jaw, shint possibly. I am the greatest. I am. Tayuya grabbed the man's head and cut off what he was going to say mid-speech. She leaned in close to Fujin's ear but spoke loud enough for Naruto to hear as well. You are fucking dead, she growled as she drove the shinobi's head backwards and impaled it on a rock that was jutting out from the statue she had taken refuge against earlier. Fujin's body twitched a few times before it simply went silent, though still remaining upright due to the method of his death. Exhausted, the redhead dropped to the ground in a heap. Naruto, now that his own adrenaline was wearing off, dropped beside her. The two said nothing as they gasped and wheezed for air. Farther away, Sarutobi watched them with a stoic face but did not interrupt them. They were now, for better or worse, bonded in a way that only those who have killed and survived together could understand. Naruto was the first to make any motion other than trying to get air back into his lungs. He turned to look at the girl who had once tried to kill him and felt something stir within himself. Now that his lust for battle was over, his Sharingan deactivated and the red haze filtered out of his thoughts and finally, the boy understood what he had done. I killed someone, he stated in shock. He looked like he could actually vomit at the thought. Chiyuya looked over at Naruto with disgust. They were going to fucking kill you, what were you supposed to do? She asked. I don't know, Naruto admitted. There had to be some other way, though. I could have bargained with them, I could have. Naruto's ranting was brought to an end when Chiyuya's fist plowed into his face. The Konoha Genin fell back on his back and looked at his companion with shock etched on his face. You dumb, naive bastard. Chiyuya shouted. You were going to die, you prick. They would have carved out your eyes like something to be fucking harvested. You had an escape, you took it, end of the damn story. She raved. Don't you dare regret this, don't you fucking dare. I'll be damned if I teamed up with a peace-mongering leaf fag. The two stared at each other in silence for a few moments before Naruto simply rose to his feet. Chiyuya gritted her teeth, she hated that this little coward had gotten under her skin like that. Now he was simply going to run away from this and back to his perfect little life back in his damned village and not appreciate the freedom he had. That damn bastard. Chiyuya was shocked, then, when Naruto bent down to sling her arm over his shoulder. Come on, we gotta see if you're hurt. Naruto said. Chiyuya wanted to push him away and declare that she didn't need any help but she swallowed her pride and allowed herself to be helped just this once. Her body hurt too much to be difficult. As Naruto saw his grandfather walking to meet them halfway, he leaned in close to the kunoichi's ear. Hey, thanks for helping me back there, he said, surprising the girl. We really kicked some ass, huh? Chiyuya couldn't help it, she smirked. Fuck yes we did. That little bitch's head cracked open like a rotten watermelon, she stated simply to get a rise out of her companion. To her annoyance, Naruto didn't take the bait and only smirked back. For some reason, though, she felt her face heating up under his gaze. Good work, Naruto, Sarutobi said once his grandson was within earshot. Looks like you didn't need my help after all. Naruto chuckled and smiled at Chiyuya. That's not true, you two really saved my butt. Did you see her fight? It was amazing. Yes, I saw that, the Hokage stated. There were many things he wanted to ask the girl that was practically draped over his grandson but he refrained. She was a foreign shinobi that had helped with an inter-village matter and such things had to be taken into consideration. I would like to express my gratitude for what you did for my grandson, Odo-san, Sarutobi said as he didn't know the girl's name. Chiyuya sized the old man up. So this is Orochimaru's old sensei. How could this wrinkly guy be that big of a threat? She asked herself. Chiyuya nodded in acknowledgement of the thanks, silently deciding that there was more to the old man that meets the eye. Hokage-sama. All three shinobi turned towards the forest as Kakashi, Anko, Ino, and Orochi finally arrived with Pakun in the lead. Sarutobi groaned. If only they hadn't have seen through his little detour then maybe he could have kept this under wraps. Kakashi, glad to see you made it. The Junin sheepishly scratched the back of his head as he looked at the sheer destruction all around him. It was that bad, huh? He asked, already knowing the answer. Anko and Ino, however, weren't paying attention to the damage at all. Their attention was riveted to the object of their search. Naruto, you little brat, you had me worried. Anko scolded, choosing to rudely ignore Chiyuya in favor of looking the blonde genin over for serious injuries. She whistled when she noticed the full extent of the large gash on his chest. Wonderful, you got hit that badly. Do you have any talent at all? She asked sarcastically. Ah, it wasn't my fault. The guy the first was fighting had this wind thing and it caught me by surprise. Naruto defended, whined. After the war he had just been through, all Anko worried about was his performance. Anko smiled at the pout Naruto made and swept the boy up in a hug that surprised the boy and Chiyuya who was partially caught in it as well. I'm glad you're alright, Naruto. Anko said with sincerity. Chiyuya, however, chose to ruin the moment for reasons that went beyond her perpetual bad mood. Hey, I don't swing that way, hag, the redhead growled as she used her free arm to push Anko away from her and, by proxy, Naruto. Don't flatter yourself, Anko frowned. I have better taste in partners than little children. Naruto suddenly found himself a bit annoyed. Hey, she's been through a lot. Cut her a bit of slack, the boy ordered, surprising both Anko and Chiyuya. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for her. Ino scowled at Chiyuya. Really? Looks like she's the one dragging you down, Ino mumbled. Naruto didn't catch what she had said, but Chiyuya did and the redhead growled. Naruto turned to see who had upset the Odo nin this time and was surprised to see Ino. Ino, what are you doing here? He asked. The blonde kunoichi only turned away with a frown and walked towards Kakashi and the Hokage. Said two shinobi were quietly mulling over the events that had just played out. Well, that was a first, Kakashi finally stated. I've never seen Naruto be so short with Anko before. Sarutobi nodded. That's what happens when people go through what those two did together. I would have much rather have had someone like you or Anko, even Ino, be there for Naruto when he made his first kill, but the situation dictated otherwise. His first kill. Kakashi struggled with the words. You mean, Naruto? He trailed off as the Hokage pointed to a patch of scorched earth a few yards over where the remains of Raijin were still smoldering. Kami-sama. Was it? Yes, the Uchiha rage. Seems it skipped a generation with Obito, Sarutobi sighed. Still, he took care of himself and showed great potential in combat, I think. Where's Asuma-sensei? Ino called out suddenly. The blonde girl had been scanning the area for the chain-smoking Junin but to no avail. And why is Hokage-sama here? She added as an afterthought. Kakashi snuck a look to the Hokage and the old man shrugged. Ah, my son. Hopefully he's doing the favor I asked him to do and is back in Konoha watching over things for me, Sarutobi responded. Ino's brow furrowed in confusion before the meaning hit her. It was you all along. She cried out in disbelief. When the Hokage chuckled and nodded, Ino almost fell over. All of the encouragement, advice, and guidance over the last day had come from someone who she hardly knew. Wasn't the Hokage supposed to be aloof and uncaring? Suddenly, the young Yamanaka had new appreciation and respect for the man standing before her. Well, what do we have here? Looks like an invasion. Everyone's head whipped upwards to the new voice and Kakashi instantly made out three figures standing on top of the Uchiha Madara statue. The boy who had spoke had a deep tan and a spiky ponytail. The boy beside him was tall and pale with short hair. The smirk he was wearing was an indicator of his nature. The last of the three watched everyone with a hint of suspicion that showed a hidden competence lurking behind his otherwise pudgy exterior. When Tayuya saw the figures, she cursed loudly, drawing their attention to her. The pale boy with short hair smiled even wider when he saw the state she was in. Got your ass kicked and taken prisoner, huh? Nicely done, he mocked. Shut the fuck up, fag. Tayuya shot back. I was in a hell of a fight while you three were laying around like the lazy bastards you are. Ladies shouldn't talk like that, the larger boy started, but Tayuya cut him off. Shove it and get the hell down here to help me get back to the village. The redhead snapped. Like a scolded puppy, Jirobu left his spot and practically ran down to follow Tayuya's orders. The other boys were looking on in curiosity that their teammate wasn't a captive. Naruto looked suspicious but relinquished his grip on the girl. He noticed that Tayuya wasn't nearly as comfortable accepting the other boy's help as she did his. They stared at each other for a moment before Tayuya broke eye contact and turned to leave the group of Konoha nin. Finally, Naruto called out to her as she and the other Odo nins were about to leave. I'm Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. He called out to Tayuya. He saw the disapproving glances coming from Anko and Kakashi for giving out his name so easily, but he ignored them. After all, they hadn't been there for him when he needed them. Tayuya flinched when she heard the blonde boy call out his name. She wanted to just leave and forget all this, wanted to get back to her cold little room in Odo and let Kabuto patch her up before he left for Konoha, but despite her better judgment, she turned back to him. I'm Hokuman no Tayuya of Odogakure, she said barely loud enough so that Naruto could hear her. When the rest of her team looked at her like she was insane, Tayuya only snarled at them. What the fuck are you all looking at? Let's get the hell out of here. The group of Konoha nin watched the group disappear over the side of the waterfall to hide which direction they were leaving in. Well, that was anticlimactic, Kakashi stated in his usual bored tone. Anko's eyes narrowed. There was something about those four that she couldn't put her finger on. The Hokage noticed her interest but said nothing. It would be better if Anko didn't know that girl had been in contact with Orochimaru at some point. That was another thing to worry about. This Tayuya was obviously very high up on the Odo ladder if she had a full title. If so, that meant that Orochimaru might be working with Odo in some way and they were expected to attend the Chunin exams soon. Well, I want to go home and get some ramen, Naruto loudly stated, making Ino look at him as if he were insane. Anko, Kakashi, and the Hokage, however, could see that it was all bravado on Naruto's part. He was only acting like himself in order to reassure everyone else. I guess we should be getting back to the village. I have a report to file. Anyway, the Hokage mumbled as he pulled out a pipe to smoke. He didn't want to put his grandson on the spot about his little deception and would allow the boy to work it out on his own. Kakashi laughed under his mask and told Pakun to start leading the group back to Konoha, not thinking too much of Naruto's attitude. He decided it would be best to get Naruto's mind off the fact he had taken a life as he thought that was what was wrong. He made sure, however, to give the two corpses a wide berth so Ino didn't stumble upon them. Orochi lagged behind the group as they went on their way towards Konoha. He could hear Ino bugging Naruto about his fight, but he didn't pay them any attention. Instead, the snake's thoughts were lingering upon the 4 Odo shinobi. I could smell you on them. You must be moving faster than I imagined. Orochi thought to himself. It would seem that we are finally due for our first meeting in over 30 years. He turned towards the land of Odo and smiled a wide, toothy smile. Orochimaru. The trip back to Konoha didn't result in much conversation between Naruto and his rescuers. The blonde was still mulling over what he had done, and while Tayuya had beaten some sense into him, Naruto still felt guilty about taking a life. More than that, he was annoyed that no one had helped him other than a relative stranger and his grandfather. Kakashi and Anko couldn't have picked up the pace a bit. If they weren't so slow, he wouldn't have had to kill someone. There you go again, acting like a coward. Naruto snapped at himself. The voice that had snapped him back to reality during his fight with Raijin hadn't said anything more to him, nor had that shadowy figure asked for a favor, and that was beginning to worry the genin. He was really starting to wonder if he were still sane after all that. Doesn't mean that the words, regardless of where they had come from, weren't dead on. Anko subtly watched her favorite little genin as they traveled onwards. She realized what he had to be going through, judging by the condition of the battlefield they had just left. Unlike Ino, she had noticed the two bodies, even she was shocked at the condition they were in. One was driven into the side of a rock wall like a gory picture, and the other was literally cooked alive. Knowing that Naruto had been responsible for either one of the kills was not a welcome thought. Not even Orochimaru put me through that my first time. Anko sighed to herself. She got even more pensive when she noticed Naruto spacing out as he followed along on autopilot. He's brooding about it. This isn't good. The special Junin turned a small glare towards Kakashi and the Hokage, the latter of whom was leading the group back to Konoha. Neither of them had tried talking to Naruto that she had witnessed, and they didn't seem to be in a hurry to do so. Probably some idiotic notion that this was something Naruto had to deal with himself. Idiots, she grumbled under her breath. Unfortunately, her voice wasn't low enough to prevent Orochi from hearing her. What was that, female? He asked in a bored drawl. Nothing, Boots, she shot back. When the snake-turned boy looked at her with his slitted eyes, she couldn't help the sliver of fear twist down her spine. He looked too much like her own personal demon for her comfort. Hardly sounds like nothing if you're calling the Hokage and one of the top Junin in Konoha idiots, Orochi observed. Anko's eyes shot open wide. Had she mumbled something that she hadn't realized? Her panic must have been noticed as Orochi snorted. It was obvious who you were talking about since you were glaring at them the entire time, the hanged summon said as if he were explaining something trivial to a child. Deliberately dropping her speed, Anko edged away from the group and towards Orochi. Okay, but this goes no further than us or I get a nice new belt, got it? The dark-haired girl hissed. When Orochi shrugged, Anko figured that was as close to an agreement she would get out of the irksome animal and continued with her explanation. Don't you think the kid is acting a bit weird? Anko asked. Is that all you're worried about? Orochi scoffed as he concentrated on not falling out of pace with the special Junin. He wasn't nearly as used to tree traveling as the rest of the group was. What do you expect? Naruto was kidnapped, the snake pointed out. Anko shook her head. No shit. I mean that he's acting all angsty about killing someone. I've seen people break over crap like that. Orochi looked over at his summoner. It was true that Naruto was being a bit too quiet, but it was nothing he, nor any of his companions other than Anko, seemed to be worried about it. You're looking too much into things, female, the snake decided. The older woman wasn't about to leave things like that, so she sped up to get parallel with the Hokage himself. Kakashi, who raised an eyebrow at Anko breaking formation, made sure to eavesdrop in case it was something serious. Ah, Anko, is something the matter? The aged Hokage asked as he noticed Anko closing in on him. The special Junin cast a weary eye back at her fellow travelers and lowered her voice to a near whisper. Hokage-sama, I'm worried about Naruto, she plainly stated. The old man quickly snapped his head around in alarm. He sighed in relief once he saw his grandson still following along and in one piece. What's wrong, Anko-san? He asked more out of curiosity than fear for the blonde. Haven't you noticed how distant he's being? Anko harshly whispered. You are all ignoring it. It's something he has to deal with himself, the Sandaime replied in a tired tone. I'm sure you remember the first time you took a life and how jarring it was. Anko flinched at the unwanted memory. The Hokage noticed his choice of words and regretted them, but the damage was already done. To the old man's surprise, though, the special Junin didn't back down. I still think this is something else, Anko insisted. Seeing the depth of Anko's concern, the Hokage sighed. Well, what do you have in mind? Caught off guard by the sudden indulgence, Anko fumbled for an answer. We don't have to get back to the village right away, right? I mean, it's not exactly safe, the purple-haired woman finally replied. That spy is still running around. The Hokage rubbed his forehead, he could definitely feel a headache setting in. Again, What do you have in mind? He asked again. Let the kid run around for a bit until you get this thing settled. He doesn't need to live in fear right after something like this, Enko pointed out. I mean, we can keep the council in the dark too if we call this a vacation. I know you want to do that. Enko could practically feel the old Hokage leaning in her direction. As subtle as a snake. Sarutobi thought with a sigh. I suppose you're right, but Naruto has injuries that need to be addressed, the elderly man argued. Enko smiled. She had him now. Injuries that you can heal. After all, Professor, you know just about every jutsu used in Konoha, including medical jutsu, right? You know he'll heal up with or without intervention. When the Hokage's face darkened, the woman reassured him. Don't worry, I'll get the brat back to you in one piece. Enko promised. Then, in a quieter voice, she said, after all, I care just as much as you do about that damned kid. He really needs this right now. Further behind the Hokage and Enko, Kakashi quietly mulled over the conversation he had just eavesdropped in on. At first the masked Junin was ready to strangle Enko for even suggesting that they go anywhere but straight back to Konoha. However, the more the female Junin explained, the more Kakashi had to, grudgingly, admit she had a point. Something had happened to Naruto, something that probably wasn't just going to go away with time. Frequenting Obito's grave every day was proof of what a situation like this could do to someone. There was also the matter of the council to get around. The way the Hokage was talking, it almost sounds like they know about the Kyuubi, Kakashi thought with a frown. The last thing anyone needed was for that little bit of history to come to light. Hokage-sama, Kakashi called out in his usual lazy drawl, aren't you and Anko-chan going to ask me about any of this? The special Junin shot Kakashi a particularly nasty glare at the suffix. Shut it, bright eyes. The last thing we need right now is you sticking your nose into this, Anko hissed. Ah, of course we were, the Hokage answered. What do you think about Anko-san's proposal? Well, Kakashi drew out the word just for fun. It was interesting to see Anko try and hold a glare while traveling through a forest. I suppose Naruto could use a vacation, he finally answered, much to Anko's and the Hokage's surprise. Anko narrowed her eyes as she maneuvered over a tree limb. And you're all right with just me and him going? And here I thought you'd be worried to death. The Junin shrugged and pulled out his little orange book. I'm not concerned. Naruto is responsible enough to keep you out of trouble. Kakashi had to put his book back up when he found a kunai jutting through it. That's a waste of paper, Anko, he deadpanned. The younger woman only smiled innocently, such an expression certainly not fitting Anko's reputation. The Hokage, fearing Anko wouldn't miss with the next volley, finally spoke back up. Ahem. I still want to know where you plan on taking him, Anko, the older man stated with some sternness. With a wave of her hand, Anko dismissed the concern. Don't worry so much, this is a pupil-student bonding thing. I'm not going to run off with him. Maybe we'll head over to Iwa or something, show the brat how to move around without drawing attention to himself. He's not very stealthy, you know, Anko informed the two men. If that's all you're going to do, I suppose. The Hokage finally relinquished. Before he could finish, Anko had reversed direction and had grabbed Naruto by the scruff of his collar. The blonde yelped and Ino made a move to follow, but Sarutobi waved her off. Don't worry about it, Ino-san, he informed the genin with a tired smile. That's just Mitarashi-san being herself. Naruto will be fine. When he heard Naruto still bickering with Anko, his face fell. I think. Slash dash 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 slash. What the hell are you doing, hubby-chan? Naruto yelled as he was being dragged along by his shirt. This wouldn't have been so panic-worthy if not for the fact Anko was dragging him through the forest canopy. Said woman finally relinquished her hold on Naruto and dropped the genin's stomach first onto the nearest tree branch. Whoops, sorry Gaki, Anko half-heartedly apologized. Naruto mumbled something under his breath when he struggled to his feet. You could try a bit harder to at least look like you're sorry. That smile isn't helping, the genin grumbled. Whatever, it's the thought that counts, Anko shrugged. I had to get you out of there before someone changed their mind about our little detour, she explained. What detour? Naruto asked with a tiny bit of unease. He really wanted to get home and sleep. Anko's smile took on a sinister quality as she tossed the blonde a small book. That detour. Still eyeing the woman with weary caution, Naruto opened the book. Hoshigaki Kisame, Momochi Zabuza, Sasori of the Red Sand. Naruto read off, this is a bingo book, right? What's that have to do with anything? The older woman chuckled. Everything. We're going hunting, kid. Can't let you wallow in self-pity forever, can we? I'm not wallowing, Naruto shouted back, surprising Anko. I just want to forget this entire damn thing. I want to go home, to get back to my life. I want. Before Naruto could finish, the woman's curled fist struck home with a resounding crack. The blonde, stunned as he was, fell from the treetops without even trying to right himself. He landed in a heap on the forest floor. Behind him, Anko dropped to the ground. With a hand trembling with rage, she grabbed the genin up by the back of his neck and slammed his back into the tree she had knocked him out of. Listen to me, you little piece of trash. She snarled, and Naruto did just that. The look in Anko's eyes was unlike anything he had ever seen. What was even more startling was that her pupils had started to glow a shade brighter, almost like a cat, or a snake. You go home and bottle this shit up and you'll go insane. It'll eat at you like a rat chewing on a rotting corpse. You listen to me right now, or so help me, I'll cut every thought you're of your thick skull until you can't do anything else but listen. She threatened. With her lips set in a firm snarl, the purple-haired special Junin leaned in closer. We are not setting foot back in Konoha until I'm convinced this isn't going to break you, got it? She demanded. All Naruto could do in his position was nod. He was too afraid of the woman before him to do anything else. Good, now keep that tongue silent or I chop it off. Move. Dropping the terrified genin, Anko headed off in the direction she had originally been going. Without a moment's delay, a thoroughly shaken Naruto followed her like a frightened animal. Mentally, Anko strived to calm herself. She had lost control. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That brat is just too much, though. He's acting like a crybaby. Anko told herself. Still, the trip had gotten off to a very bad start. Naruto was of similar mind as he followed Anko through the forest. Although he was quite shocked with the sudden departure from the main group, he was outright afraid of Anko's recent mood swing, and the blonde was more than a little pissed. He had just gotten back from a practical war and he didn't need this right now. Especially not after he had killed those people. For now, he followed along, but his mood was rapidly deteriorating with every step he took. Finally, the pair emerged from the forest near a small village that served as one of many farming communities that fed the mammoth beast that was Konoha. The people were all farmers and laborers, citizens that were unused to seeing actual Konoha shinobi outside of an armed conflict. As such, many of them gave Anko and Naruto a wide berth as the pair casually walked into the main part of the town. Okay, listen up, Anko ordered in a low voice. Naruto, still wary of this entire outing, gave her his undivided attention. First things first, we're going to get that mangled body of yours fixed up before you get an infection or something and keel over. You really wrecked yourself, you know that. Naruto blinked at the sudden concern the mistress of snakes was showing him. Wasn't she practically threatening his life just a few hours ago? Sorry. Naruto apologized more out of reflex than actual feelings of guilt. Anko snorted. Whatever. See that house up there? Anko pointed to one of the buildings in the distance. Go up there and get fixed up. The guy in there is one of the better civilian doctors in the area. I'll go buy us some traveling clothes and then we'll go somewhere to decide on our first target, the older woman instructed before she walked away towards another building. Watching her leave, Naruto made a mental note on how well Anko seemed to know the layout of this town. However, once she was gone, the genin finally took a good look at himself and decided that Anko had a point. They couldn't track anyone worth anything with him as cut up as this. The smell of the dried blood alone could alert even an average ninja of their presence. Since when do I care about this thing? Naruto asked himself out loud when he caught himself actually looking forward to the trip. Smothering the unwanted feelings under the mountain of discomfort he was feeling due to being on the road once again, Naruto walked off towards the building Anko had pointed out earlier. Not bothering to knock, it was a doctor's office after all, the blonde simply strolled inside. Anyone around? He called out. The parlor Naruto was standing in was just as plain as the rest of the village. He could see a few pieces of paper hanging on the wall and Naruto recognized them as civilian degrees. Apparently this doctor had some credentials, something that was not common among most non-shinobi doctors. Just a minute. A voice from somewhere deep in the office called out. Just make yourself comfortable, alright. Seeing a single chair resting against the wall, Naruto slumped down into it in an undignified heap. It felt like ages since the last time he was sitting on something as comfortable as this chair. So soft. I could just die in this thing, Naruto thought with a small smile. Stupid Anko-chan dragging me out here, was the last thought the young boy had before he was lulled into the sweet embrace of sleep. Achoo. Anko snuffed and rubbed her nose with a scowl. Some ungrateful brat is talking about me. She mumbled to herself as she pulled out her small money pouch to pay for the several articles of clothing she had picked out for Naruto and herself. Just a few dark-colored shirts for Naruto and several tank tops for herself along with 2 travel backpacks. Simple was best in her opinion. With that out of the way, she headed back towards the doctor office. Once inside she spotted Naruto sleeping but didn't care too much. It was obvious the doctor hadn't gotten to him yet. Still. Only one chair. The special Junin chuckled low in her throat. Oh well, if the kid is a real shinobi, he should be able to dodge this even in his sleep, she stated to herself as she pulled out Naruto's full travel bag. Using it as a club, she whacked the sleeping boy in the head with a well-aimed swing. Ah! Naruto yelled as he fell out of the chair. The battered blonde rubbed the back of his head as he looked behind him to see whatever had interrupted his favorite ramen-themed dream only to find a grinning Anko sprawled out on his former perch. Comfortable, hubby-chan. Naruto deadpanned. Anko was momentarily surprised at the recurrence of Naruto's nickname for her, but she was over it in record time. Making a show of stretching out, she grinned even wider. As soon as I get back to the village, I'm getting one of these chairs, she declared in her usual loud way. Naruto scoffed and pushed Anko's feet off the armrest of the large chair so he could gain a foothold in his eventual chair reclaiming campaign. Yeah, right. Maybe if I don't buy them all first. The genin answered back as he pushed against Anko with his bulk, trying to make her either move over or get off the chair. Oh yeah? The woman asked with obvious skepticism. It came out as more of grunt as she pushed Naruto to get her chair back. I don't see how you can with that crap salary genins make. Another push sent Naruto edging closer and closer to the edge. Naruto put on a grudging smile as he tried to use superior leverage to overcome Anko's new assault. Then I guess I'll just have to bag a really big bounty, won't I? He asked as he gave Anko another playful shove. This one sent her falling back to the other side of the chair and left them equal shares. Anko narrowed her eyes, but the smile pulling on her lips gave her away. Is that right? What can a little kid like you do? I'll be sure to toss you a few scraps, though. Anko broke out into a dramatic laugh complete with a shrillness that rattled the glass windows of the office. Naruto stared at her for a moment before laughing along with her. Oh, you should have told me you were out here, Naga. How's Lena? An old man asked as he stepped out of the back room. Hey, you're not Naga. He pointed out after Anko and Naruto stopped playing around due to the audience. Naruto was the first to compose himself and he shot up from his former snug position with a start. Sorry, we didn't mean to make so much noise. Naruto was still a bit embarrassed from being walked in on, but Anko smirked and lazily dangled her feet over the opposite armrest of the chair. Dr. Kusanagi, you're looking well for your age, Anko called out to the elderly doctor. The man, Dr. Kusanagi, adjusted his huge bifocal glasses and chuckled. Only one girl would be so cruel to this old man, he laughed. Anko-chan, have you been? Anko smirked and dismissed her life with the wave of her hand. Oh, life has been just peachy. The only hiccup is taking care of this brat, the special Junin pointed to Naruto. He can't play nice with his little ninja friends and they beat the crap out of him, you see. We need to get him patched up, doc. In the blink of an eye the small doctor was by Naruto's side checking him over. Naruto groaned and twitched as he was poked and prodded by whatever the old man had with him. The large gash on his chest seemed to garner the most attention. Yes, this will have to be treated. It's not that deep so you won't need stitches, though, Dr. Kusanagi appraised. Come on back and I'll get you fit as a fiddle. Naruto looked back to Anko to see what she wanted to do. Catching this action, the purple-haired woman grinned and waved him off. You heard the man, go on back. You can't have me holding your hand all the time, brat. There was no admonishment in her voice, however, only amusement. Dutifully, Naruto followed the small doctor into his office operating room. Out the corner of his eye Naruto could see Anko really stretch out. Probably going to go to sleep, the lazy snake. My, Anko really cares about you, Dr. Kusanagi suddenly stated as he pulled out some alcohol to disinfect the gash on Naruto's chest. The genin blinked, not sure if he had heard the old man correctly. Naruto waited on Kusanagi to elaborate for several moments, but apparently the statement was just that. How do you know that? Naruto finally asked. The old man laughed as he poured a bit of the alcohol onto a sterile gauze rag. That's easy, I've never seen her so relaxed. Take off your shirt please, young man. When Naruto complied, he pressed the purifying rag onto the wound. Naruto let out a loud hiss and the doctor continued with his explanation. It used to be that she was so nervous whenever she'd come here with someone else. Why, I remember her first visit with that teacher of hers about 10 or so years ago. That Sanin, Orochimaru. She was so formal and spooked. Naruto memorized everything the man was saying. He had never heard about Anko's early life. Especially Orochimaru. He had done some research when he was in the academy and had found out Orochimaru was one of the most infamous criminals in Konoha's history. Wait, Anko was Orochimaru's genin student. Naruto yelled, shocked. The doctor looked up, surprised. You didn't know that. I suppose she wouldn't tell anyone after he left and all, but they were quite close. In fact, I even suspected. Kusanagi let his thought drop with a frown. In any event, I didn't like the man. He was a snake wearing a new man's suit, of that I'm sure. Anyway, we're all done here, he stated to Naruto's surprise. The genin looked himself over to find that most of his minor cuts had been cleaned and bandaged along with the large gash in his chest. He hadn't even felt them. Wow, pretty good for someone that doesn't use medical jutsu, Naruto stated in appreciation. The older man simply chuckled at the compliment and walked out to the lobby, leaving Naruto to put his clothes back on. Naruto held up his shirt, which was caked with dried blood and full of holes. No way he could wear this again. His pants were in a similar state, so he tossed both in the trash can without a second thought. Good thing I wore boxers, Naruto thought as he followed the doctor out. Anko was supposed to have gotten him some clothes, after all. Said Special Junin was talking with Dr. Kusanagi, but the conversation ended when Naruto entered since Anko was too distracted to continue. If Naruto was a lesser man, he would have run in fear from the look Anko was giving him. It made Naruto feel a bit like a canary in the middle of a snake's den, and he actually blushed as Anko leered. I didn't know you liked them that young, Anko-chan, the doctor said with a chuckle when he followed the young woman's eyes. Instead of the good-natured laughter the old man had expected, Anko immediately turned paler and set her face into an emotionless mask. She quickly picked up Naruto's pack and tossed it at the uncomfortable genin. Naruto managed to catch it before Anko mumbled something about taking too much time to the doctor and leaving the small building. The old man looked pained to see Anko in that state. There she goes closing up again, he sighed. Better get ready, young man, you don't want to keep her waiting. With that said, he gave Naruto a pat on the back and shuffled back into his office. The blonde boy took his advice and put on his clothes in the lobby before running out after Anko. Hubby-chan. Wait up, Naruto called out. The woman in question looked to be deep in thought about something and didn't immediately acknowledge the boy's presence. When she finally did look up, her face was the same business-like expression she had when she left the doctor's office. Get a move on, brat, we're going back to Konoha before it gets dark. The tone Anko used made it clear she didn't want nor expect any argument. It was a pity that Naruto had been pushed too far for once. No, the boy said with as much finality as Anko had managed to muster. The two glared at each other through rapidly narrowing eyes before Naruto continued. You dragged me all the way out here because you think this would be good for me. What's changed? He challenged. Anko almost snarled at him. I made a mistake, Anko practically forced out. You're fine, everything's fine. We're leaving, it's what you wanted, so stop being a brat about it, she ordered. Naruto only shook his head. We spent all this time getting out here and I'm at least going to spend the night in a soft bed. You can go back to the village yourself if you want, but I'm going to sleep here. The silent battle of wills waged onward as Anko was put on the defensive. If she went back to the village without Naruto, the Hokage would skin her alive. By the small smirk Naruto was wearing, he knew it as well. Fine. Anko spat and stomped off towards what Naruto assumed to be the village's inn. Sure enough, the pair soon came upon a two-story building that had a small sign up that said, vacancy, in the window. Anko was the first in the door as Naruto followed her. It was a small place, the first floor no larger than the doctor's house, but it left enough room for a few tables and a desk. The young man behind the counter smiled at them despite their mutual expressions of incredible annoyance. We need 2 rooms. Both singles, Anko ordered. Naruto was slightly irked that the woman had dictated what kind of room he was going to get, but he didn't call her on it. If the clerk was offended by the rough tone, he didn't show it as he rummaged through his guest book. He did look a little reluctant when he opened his mouth to reply, however. I'm terribly sorry, but we don't have 2 rooms available. You see, a grain supplier just came through recently and he and his men are staying. What do you have then? Naruto cut him off before he could ramble on further. The man looked down at his guest book once again. We have a double available. There are separate beds, he answered. That's fine, we'll take it, Naruto again spoke up before Anko. The Junin looked particularly pissed when the blonde pulled out a few bills to pay the clerk. That taken care of, the two walked in silence up to their room. As they approached, Anko looked more and more skittish and Naruto was starting to seriously worry. The genin unlocked the room with the key he had been given and went inside. It was exactly what the clerk had described. 2 beds, a bath with only a shower, and a small table off to the side that served as a nightstand. There were large bay doors that led out to a small balcony. From there, one could get an excellent view of the town. Since it was dark out, Naruto could see all the lights that lit up the small hamlet. Anko walked in after the boy and gave the room her own personal look over before dropping her travel pack beside the bed closest to the window. You take the bed closest to the door, Anko said with a long-suffering sigh. In the light of the room, Naruto could see her face more clearly and the worried expression she had. Anko, he started. Good night, Naruto, Anko cut him off before he could finish what he was going to say. The older woman roughly kicked off her boots and slid under the covers of her bed. Naruto could have also sworn she pulled a kunai out before she took off her coat, as well. Fine, be that way, Naruto mentally told the psychotic Junin. He had heard things about Anko but he never had believed them until now. Maybe being with someone like Orochimaru had done it to her. Either way, he was too upset with her flaky attitude to care at the moment and he too pulled off his shoes to get under the covers. Sleep, it seems, was equally as elusive to the two as a mutual understanding. Slash dash 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 slash. What is our status on the acquisition of the Bijou? A shadowy figure asked. Off to his side, several more figures looked on without expression in the dark recesses of the small cave. Two of them, however, had more substance to them than the rest. In response to the inquiry, one of the figures stepped out from their place. We are in possession of 2 Bijou with confirmed locations on 3 more. One of them is on the loose so it's hard to track, the other is in Konoha and protected. That is not the case. All eyes turned to the figure that spoke. That particular one is now vulnerable. I believe those 2 can take him now with little effort. It's not time yet, This was the voice of yet another member speaking out. If we take too many we'll draw unwanted attention. Yeah. The original speaker listened without expression to both arguments before motioning to the 2 more substantial listeners. This might bring attention to us but such a chance cannot be missed. You will capture the Kyuubi and we will extract it. Understood. With a slight inclination of his head, the order was received and the cave went back to its usual look save for 2 figures standing in its depths. The taller of the 2 leaned back on a stalagmite. So, we finally get some action. And it's a Konoha nin as well, it's been ages since I fought one. The shorter of the 2 only, H'ent, in response and started to walk out of the cave. His partner, already used to his quirks, only smiled wider at the prospect of giving his beloved sword some blood. Once they were outside in the night air, the taller man again spoke. So, where do we start looking, Itachi-san? Uchiha Itachi looked out towards the great forest that made up much of the land of fire. Where there is the Kyuubi, there is chaos. It does not matter if it is sealed, Kisame. We start where there is bloodshed. Itachi answered as his Sharingan eyes started to spin in madness. Slash dash 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 slash. Naruto awoke with a start. He had been riddled with nightmares in the past but this sleep was 100 times worse. A dreamless, restless sleep that felt like the cold hand of death. It was a feeling the genin didn't relish. I guess I just have a lot on my mind, he thought as he sank back down into his single pillow. His mind replayed Anko's strange behavior over and over again. While he was still dealing with what had transpired during his kidnapping, Naruto was more worried about his companion's sudden shift in attitude. I just don't know enough about her, he decided. Anko, Naruto called out quietly, timidly. His mind ordered him to demand answers but his heart reminded him just who this was. Silence was all that answered the genin. Naruto sighed and debated on how wise it would be to simply wake the older women up. It would probably include dodging a few hundred kunai judging from how soundly Anko seemed to be asleep. In fact, it must be very peaceful if she was being this quiet. Wait, I can't hear her breathing. As he expected, Naruto turned over towards Anko's bed only to find it empty. The moonlight showed that the covers were hardly crumpled at all, it was as if Anko had only passed through the bed. Suddenly, a shadow moved past the beam of light and Naruto looked for the source. There, on the small balcony, was the source of his current waking thoughts watching the moon with a most pitiable look. It's cold out here, isn't it? Naruto asked through the large glass doors that separated Anko from the room. The older Junin didn't even bother to show she noticed the boy and simply stared out at the sea of trees beyond the small town. Naruto couldn't help but be struck by how beautiful the snake mistress looked in the pale moonlight. The vacant, haunted expression made the overall effect breathtaking. Even so, he set out upon his original mission. Anko, tell me, explain to me, he implored. Naruto didn't have to say what he was referring to. When the Junin still didn't answer, the genin ran a hand through his mop of blonde hair in frustration. Why won't you let me in? He asked her in a harsh whisper, knowing she couldn't hear him. Quote. Good night, Anko-chan, Naruto said louder as he walked back to his bed. The first time I was here I was amazed by the full moon. Anko said as if she were talking to herself. Immediately, Naruto made his way back over to the glass door but he didn't venture outside lest he break whatever mood had caught the woman. That was over 10 years ago on my first mission. We were heading towards Wave Country. Anko didn't mention who the other person was but Naruto had an idea. Orochimaru. It was a statement. Anko laughed, the sound coming out hollow as she turned to fully regard Naruto for the first time. Orochimaru. I used to think I loved him. Maybe I did, she admitted. I would have done anything, I did do anything, for him. He was my life and I thought I was his. Anko took a deep breath before continuing. That's why. She stopped short as she debated with herself. That's why. I don't trust myself around you. I don't want to be him and taint pure innocence. She turned to fully look at the stunned boy with a sad smile. You should be free. Free from having to live the life that I led, the life that I still led. I won't make you captive to a fate you don't deserve. You should have a teacher that cares for you, that won't use you, that isn't an insane, dead husk of a person that died a decade ago. Break out, Naruto. Open your eyes and break out. Anko turned back to the balcony and the comforting darkness. For a moment, the only sound was the steady breathing of Naruto and the broken breathing of Anko. Then, there was the sound of a glass door finally being slid open and a sharp intake of breath from the older Junin as two warm arms circled around her waist. Naruto's breathing became erratic as his body shook with silent sobs. Anko could feel the cold drops of water hitting her bare shoulder. No words were said as there were none that could be uttered. Even when the sun finally hit the two sleeping figures resting on the balcony the next morning, the rays did little more than expose the peaceful expressions of two free, captive, people. Sakura, you're going to be late for your team meeting. Haruno Sakura, Kunoichi of Konoha, quickly finished tying her forehead protector into place atop her head. Coming, Mom, she called as she raced down the stairs. Grabbing her lunch on the way out, the pink-haired girl was gone before her mother could even wish her goodbye. As the well-liked Genin ran through the streets on her way to Team 7's training ground, people would call out their greetings. Of course, being the nice girl she was, Sakura would call back to them and smile. On the inside, however, she was anything but happy. The same routine day in and day out. Get up early, go to meet her team, get ignored by her teacher, try and win Sasuke's affections, go home and sleep so she could repeat it the next day. Once in a while Kakashi would take a mission and some of the monotony would dissipate for a day, but eventually it would go back to the same rut. It wouldn't be so bad if she had someone to vent on, but, despite being liked by the majority of people that knew her, she had no friends. Sakura wasn't ignorant, she knew why she didn't. It all boiled down to a mistake she had made 5 years prior during her second year in the academy. A stupid feud over someone as ridiculous as Uchiha Sasuke. Oh, she still liked the boy a great deal, no doubt about it, but, as her unique position on his team showed her, he was not a pleasant person to be around. His constant digging at Hyuga Neji, her other teammate, was reaching the point where the two couldn't even spar together without turning it into a vicious grudge match. Sakura looked around the training area and let out a sigh of relief that she was the only one present. She actually came early so she could do some light exercises without being silently taunted by Neji for being so weak. The first few times the Hyuga had opened his mouth about her condition, Sakura had argued back and the boy had launched into his tirade about the fate of weaker shinobi. Again, she had argued the point at first, but eventually she had given up as with each new day Neji became more and more scathing with his insults. Now, Sakura simply trained when no one was around. Starting with some light stretching, Sakura silently mused on her so-called teacher. Hitaki Kakashi, she knew, was that Naruto kid's uncle, but she had yet to see him do anything all that great. In fact, besides throwing a few short comments her way, he spent far more time with Neji or Sasuke. While they would get praise and appraisal, she would only get a few minutes at the end of the day, usually suggestions to train more, or you're a genjutsu type. Not that Kakashi ever taught her any genjutsu, anyway. Lazy bastard, Sakura hissed as she started running laps around the large training area. A few years ago the genin would have never used language like that. Well, out loud, anyway. Now, though, she was far too mad at life in general to care. More and more, she felt like her entire existence was merely a stepping stone for someone else. Sure, chances are she'd make Chunin one day, perhaps even Junin, but what else? What would Haruno Sakura be remembered for? Did anyone other than her parents even care about what she did anymore? Her teammates didn't, her old classmates didn't, and for certainty, her rival didn't. Yamanaka Ino. The very name made Sakura practically boil. Years ago they had been inseparable until along came a certain boy named Uchiha Sasuke. When Sakura, as young and stupid as she saw herself back then, heard that Ino had fallen for the person she had an interest in, she had quickly ended the friendship and started their long chain of one-upmanship that was seemingly coming to an end due to recent developments. Sakura finished her laps and scowled at herself as she fought for air. Of course Ino wouldn't see her as a rival anymore, and no one on her team would take her seriously. I'm weak, the young girl whispered to herself with hate lacing her voice. Pushing past the burning sensation in her legs, as she did every day, Sakura continued to run. It was casual, even fun, at first. Every day back in the academy Ino would take a shot at her large forehead and she would respond with a crack about Ino's name. They may have not been friends, but it was comforting, at least to Sakura, to have that kind of companionship even after they had parted ways. Then, everything had changed. A year before graduation, Ino had started to get special training from Uzumaki Naruto. At first, Sakura didn't care too much about it. After all, it was nothing that great. So Ino could walk up and down walls, big deal. However, it didn't end there. As the months progressed, Ino kept making more and more strides towards being not only the best kunoichi in the class, but even the best ninja overall. By graduation, there were only a handful of male students that could beat her in a fight and the closest any kunoichi came to her was Hyuga Hinata. Sakura was left completely in the dust. Damn you, Ino. Sakura cursed as she pushed her body to its limits. Sakura's first thoughts on this gap were outrage. She was the smartest person in the class, why would everyone like Ino so much just because she could fight? Fighting wasn't everything. She had honestly thought that the teachers would start to give her more attention once the Ino craze, as she called it, died down. How wrong she was. Ino had graduated with honors and word was that Sarutobi Asuma had personally wanted her on his team based on her amazing abilities. Sakura. She was in the leftover column and merely got put with the team that had an extra slot on it. Exhausted, Sakura slumped down to the ground with a pained heave. The grass felt comfortable under her tired and abused muscles, so the genin allowed herself a break to just enjoy the spring air. A swaying cosmos flower growing wild on the training ground reminded her of when she first met Ino. Things had been so simple back then. She had just been Ino's friend, one of her only friends, and they were practically connected to one another. Now, there was a rift a mile wide between them and Sakura could not find a bridge strong enough to connect them. Damn you, Naruto, Sakura said through clenched teeth. She blamed everything on the strange blonde boy that had taken her place as Ino's best friend. If it weren't for him, Ino wouldn't be so unapproachable, so distant. They would still have things in common and, maybe, be on the same team. Even though it would mean sharing Sasuke's non-existent affections, Sakura would happily have Ino on Team 7 if only to be around her once again. The Cosmo flower dancing in the wind mesmerized her with memories of her life before Sasuke, before being a ninja, before Uzumaki Naruto and a lone tear gathered at the edge of her eye. With a flick of her wrist, Sakura sent a kunai cutting through the flower, forever robbing the world of its beauty. Now, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood, Sakura roughly wiped away the tears and stood back up. I swear, I'll get you to notice me again, Sakura swore to empty sky. Notice who? Sakura spun around in surprise. There, leaning up against a tree, as if he didn't have a care in the world, was Hitaki Kakashi. Nothing. Sakura quickly answered back, dusting herself off. You're here early, Kakashi-sensei, is something wrong? The pink-haired genin asked with a forced smile. The Junin raised an eyebrow, obviously suspicious of his student's abrupt change of topics. He was in no mood to call her on it, however. Up late training, he lied in response to Sakura's question. In fact, he had just gotten back to the village from tracking down his nephew's kidnappers. The Hokage had ordered him to continue with his regular training schedule so the council would not get suspicious. In fact, everyone on the mission had been sworn to silence by the aged leader and told to act as if Naruto had simply had a last-minute mission with Anko. Kakashi understood why the Hokage was covering this up so much. If he didn't, some in the council would use the kidnapping as an excuse to go to war with Hidden Cloud. However, the Junin did not like taking a mission just as he got back. Speaking of that, where are Sasuke and Neji? Kakashi asked, looking around. Sakura wilted as her teacher so quickly overlooked her. Who knows, she flatly answered before walking over to the far end of the training ground. A few minutes later, Sasuke showed up looking brutish as ever. He raised a bored eyebrow at Kakashi's presence, but left it at that in deciding to just ignore Sakura. The pink-haired genin did the same, as she wasn't in the mood to try and pry a conversation out of the angsting preteen at the moment. In fact, she was radiating such a sullen attitude that even Neji, when he showed up, didn't get in his usual pre-training dig. Okay, everyone gather around, Kakashi called out with a yawn. When his team was assembled, he continued. We have a mission today, get your gear ready and meet me at the gate in 20 minutes, he said, surprising the group. They usually had a day's preparation for a mission. Neji was the first to react to the news. What kind of mission is it? He practically demanded. C-class escort mission to Wave Country, Kakashi answered with a drawl. Anything else? He asked. When no one spoke up, the lazy Junin reiterated the time factor of the mission and departed in a swirl of leaves. Neji and Sasuke sent each other a withering glare before heading back to their respective clan houses in the same manner as their teacher. Sakura, however, had not mastered the Konoha Shunshin and was forced to walk back to her house. She didn't think much of it, however, as she was used to being left behind by everyone else. After all, she was only the girl to her sensei and probably not worth spending any amount of time on. Without so much as a grumble, Sakura started to jog back to her house. Her legs burned and protested this, but she paid them no attention, still lost in a haze of misery and memories. She was so absorbed that she didn't even try to stop her fall when she ran into the back of someone walking out of a street-side shop. The other girl yelled as she felt something run into her. Sakura fell over on her backside and looked up from the ground. There, standing over here with an annoyed expression, was the one person she both hated and obsessed over. Watch where you're going, Sakura. Ino scolded as she regained her balance. The collision hadn't even knocked her over. Sakura winced at the sound of her own name coming from Ino's mouth. Sorry, Ino, she apologized before getting back to her feet. Ino's gaze softened at the apology and she sighed. It's no problem, but you've got to be more aware of what you're doing, Ino stated. Seeing that her former classmate was red and out of breath, the long-haired Yamanaka furrowed her eyebrows. What's wrong with you? Mission. Sakura blurted out, her former fatigue forgotten. This was the most Ino had said to her in weeks and it was enough to lighten Sakura's mood considerably. The blonde girl let out a long sigh and ran a hand through her long hair. Well, do your best, Ino said in a sad tone. Sakura caught on to Ino's mood and frowned slightly. What's up with you, Ino Buddha? Sakura asked, adding her old name for Ino to provoke a reaction. Ino, however, didn't even seem to notice the friendly insult. It's that idiot, Naruto, Ino stated, not noticing how Sakura's face lost its brightness. That guy, he's such a moron, I don't know why I'm friends with him, Ino stated without any truth behind her words. It was obvious she was still worried about how he was doing. Sakura, however, was too far gone to notice this. At the moment she was seeing red and mumbled something about being late before she ran from a confused Ino as fast as her legs could carry her. Damn you, Naruto, Sakura thought once again as she reached her house. Her mother was surprised her daughter was home so early, but Sakura put on a fake smile and explained that she had a mission that might take some time to finish. The smile was so flimsy that Sakura's mother couldn't even work up the heart to call the girl on it. I'm always here for you, Sakura, she told her daughter. Sakura smiled back sadly and nodded. As she walked out the door, the younger Haruno whispered to herself, I wish you were the only person I wanted to be there for me, Mom. At the gate, Kakashi, Sasuke, and Neji were waiting with all of their things packed and ready to go. Beside them, drinking what looked like a bottle of sake, was an old man wearing glasses. It's about time you showed up, Haruno, Neji coldly remarked as Sakura ran up to the group. The girl merely looked down with a sad look, not bothering to defend herself. Kakashi, being the lazy person that he was, didn't scold the girl for being late. Truthfully, he would rather be at home curled up in his bed. Alright, this is the mission, he stated, gaining everyone's attention. We are to escort Tazuna-san here to Wave Country so he can build a bridge. We might have to deal with some bandits during the final bit of construction, but it's nothing we can't handle. Sasuke grunted his agreement while Neji smirked. Behind them, Tazuna looked them over with an approving gaze. It looks like I have some good bodyguards, he commented. With a scowl, Sakura noticed that she probably wasn't included in that appraisal. As the group moved out of Konoha, Sakura lagged behind to escape the eyes of her teammates. For a moment, she entertained the idea of getting Sasuke to talk a little, but she realized that no one was in the talkative mood. Instead, her thoughts drifted back to her short talk with Ino earlier. The more she thought upon it, the more angry and bitter she became. Now, even when that blonde show-off wasn't around, Ino was thinking about him. Suddenly, Sakura felt a hand on her shoulder and she looked over to the soft face of Tazuna. You okay, little lady? He asked in a decidedly fatherly voice. For a few moments, Sakura was too surprised to respond. Yeah, she lamely lied. Just some personal stuff. The old man didn't press the matter, but he fell in step with the young Kunoichi. That simple action lifted Sakura's spirits enough to put thoughts of former friendships and annoying blondes out of her mind for at least a short time. Then, almost imperceptibly, Kakashi looked backwards at a puddle the group had passed. Sakura only noticed it because she was behind the others. As a result, she too looked at the puddle but saw nothing strange about it. Just as she turned around to ask Kakashi about it, two chains whipped out and wrapped around the Junin. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura called out in alarm. The genin already had a kunai out and had shoved Tazuna behind her to protect him. Sasuke and Neji were on high alert and the latter had his Byakugan flaring at full force. In an act of pure gore, the chains pulled taut and eviscerated the stunned Kakashi before the genin's eyes. Sakura felt like she was about to empty her stomach and only a warning shout from Neji kept her from doing so. Look out, idiot! The Hyuga yelled out as he charged in an interception course. The shinobi that had killed Kakashi came in low to cut the unsuspecting Kunoichi and Tazuna in half with their chain, but Neji reached them first. The pale genin deftly kicked one of the ninja on the side of his head while Sasuke leapt over both and caught the second between his partner. In a coordinated pincer move, the two geniuses kept their two enemies from supporting one another by occupying them both with a flurry of taijutsu. Neji's Jiyuken moves incapacitated his opponent's arms in an instant and Sasuke capitalized on that by tossing his enemy. With the chain still binding the pair, the other went with his partner and landed in a heap. The shinobi that hadn't gotten hit by Neji, now seen as a Kiri-nin by his forehead protector, pressed a button on his clawed arm and the chain snapped free of his incapacitated accomplice. Sasuke and Neji both took positions in front of Sakura and Tazuna, ready to fight, but the action was unneeded. Faster than anyone could see, the Kiri-nin was stopped dead run by the strong arm of Kakashi. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura happily exclaimed. While she might not like the man or his nephew, he was still her teacher and she was glad he was safe. Sasuke scoffed as he eased himself out of his combat stance. Kawarimi no jutsu, he stated. Neji also smirked, amused at how tricky their sensei was. Even with a mask over his face, the genin knew the man was smiling. Sorry about that. I just wanted to see what these two were after. It's odd to see shinobi from Kirigakure this close to Konoha, Kakashi stated as he easily tied the two ninja to a tree. After he was done, he turned back to Tazuna. We need to talk. The old man sighed and walked forward, ready for what was coming. When Kakashi pinned him with a reproachful glare, he knew the jig was up. These two are Chunin, the Junin said. The mission only called for protection against bandits or thieves. At most, genin-level ninja. This is beyond our contract. I know, Tazuna said in a low voice. I had to do it, though. Wave doesn't have enough to pay for a higher class mission, he argued. We could barely pay for a C class. Neji narrowed his eyes and stepped forward. Why would anyone hire another village to kill you? You're just a bridge builder. Wave is in recession, Tazuna answered. Everything economical is controlled by the Geidu Corporation. He controls everything on the island. Shipping, labor, imports, exports, everything. The only thing that can possibly stop him is the bridge. Sakura blinked in realization. And since you're heading up the building team, he wants you dead to stop the project, she deduced. Kakashi frowned as he absorbed the information. You have to understand, we aren't prepared for something like this, he argued. Oh, it's no problem, Tazuna declared to the surprise of the Konoha nins. I'll just go back myself and get horribly mutilated. My grandson will cry a bit and my daughter will hate you all for the rest of her life. No big deal, right? The group was looking sufficiently mortified by the thought. Even Mr. Destiny, Neji, was looking sheepish. Finally, Sakura could take no more and she walked up beside the man. Come on, we can't just leave him here, she declared. You saw those Kiri nin, they'd kill him before we even got back to the village. Besides, it'll look bad for the village if we quit in the middle of a job. Of course you can talk like that, Neji stated in a haughty voice, his former reservations forgotten, since you won't have to fight. It'll be the ones actually capable of combat that will have to deal with your decision. Sasuke looked on with a raised eyebrow as if he was thinking the same thing while Kakashi actually looked annoyed by Neji's words. Sakura, however, was about to back down when she looked up at Tazuna's sullen face. How can I ever get Ino to notice me again if I can't even stand up for myself here? Sakura mentally scolded herself. With her mind made up, she turned to Neji with a determined scowl. What's wrong? Is the big, bad, Hyuga genius scared of a few ninja? She scoffed. I guess real fighting shook you up. Maybe you should head back to the village and send Hinata to take your place. I'm sure she could do it. For a moment, Sakura actually thought she had gone too far as Neji looked ready to physically attack her. Luckily, Kakashi stepped in before that could happen. Okay, that's enough of that, he stated, looking from Sakura to Neji. Sakura has a point. If we leave now other potential clients may go elsewhere. Sakura looked up at the surprised old man with a victorious smirk. Neji grumbled, but dropped the point in favor of stalking off without the group. Sasuke, looking as disinterested as ever, followed along. Kakashi hemmed to himself before he started walking again. Before he did, though, Sakura tapped his arm and he turned back around. Sensei, thanks, she said quickly with a bow. The Junin blinked with his visible eye and rubbed the back of his neck. Ah, it's no big deal, he modestly responded. As he walked off, Sakura and Tazuna continued after him. The old man looked as if a burden the size of the Fire Country had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time since graduation, Sakura felt like she had accomplished something and that was a feeling no amount of taunts from Neji or cold shoulders from Ino could take away from her. Unbeknown to the entire group, the moment they stepped off the ship in Wave Country they were being watched. The demon that was stalking the bridge builder was not the type of person who took kindly to having his job screwed up by a pair of genin. It was Kakashi that first felt alarm. The air pressure had changed slightly and there was only one thing that could do that. Everyone, get down, he yelled as he ducked for cover himself. Neji and Sasuke immediately dropped to their bellies while Sakura pulled Tazuna down with her. She almost didn't make it. Several strands of pink hair floated in the wake of the massive Zanbeitu that had almost cleaved their heads clear off their necks as it lodged in a tree. While the genin gathered their wits, Kakashi was focused upon the figure that had just appeared on the sword's hilt. The demon of the hidden mist, Kakashi stated, drawing everyone's attention, Momochi Zabuza, the second most wanted man in Kirigakure. Said missing nin was wearing a mask of bandages but it was obvious he was smirking underneath them. Oh, I'm known by Sharingan Kakashi, my reputation must be growing. Sasuke turned sharply on his teacher at the mention of the Sharingan while Neji narrowed his eyes at Zabuza. He activated his Byakugan and got prepared to charge until Kakashi held out his arm. He's on another level completely, Kakashi bluntly stated. Neji snarled and looked to attack anyway until Zabuza's eyes landed on him. The overwhelming malice that the missing nin was able to project actually made Neji fall backwards. Zabuza watched the pale-eyed boy with disinterest. You call yourselves shinobi. It's an insult to that Hittite you're wearing, the man stated with a laugh. Kakashi, however, wasn't amused and pulled up his own forehead protector to reveal a strange, swirling pupil with 3 marks in it. Sasuke's eyes widened and Sakura wondered exactly what it was. Momochi Zabuza, former Junin of Kiri, your opponent is me, Kakashi said in a sharp, commanding voice. You 3, guard Tazuna. Sakura, already in front of the man, held her kunai in a low guard. To her surprise, Zabuza noticed her and laughed. With a guard like that, you'd do better with a katana or zanbeitu, he commented with a chuckle. Kakashi pulled out a kunai from his pouch and twirled it in his fingers. If you're finished giving my students combat advice, can we start? He asked. Zabuza smirked once again before he, and his sword, disappeared. The Sharingan was instantly focused back on Zabuza as he moved to the nearby lake and stood on its surface as if it were solid ground. You can do that with water, too? Sakura asked in amazement. She knew from watching Ino that shinobi could walk up walls if they adjusted their chakra, but this was a new concept to her. As she thought that, a pang of jealousy popped up in her mind, but it was quickly stamped out by the severity of the situation. Kurigakure no Jutsu. Sakura, Sasuke, Neji, and Tazuna watched as Zabuza simply disappeared into the thick mist he had summoned. Kakashi was looking around, so it was obvious he had lost track of the other Junin. Sakura stepped back until she could feel Tazuna behind her. Sasuke and Neji had also retreated closer to her and their client, but she was the last line of defense. 8 choices. All of the Konoha nins looked around in the murky air for the source of the voice, but to no avail. Zabuza was well hidden. Liver, lungs, spine, clavicle vein, jugular, brainstem, kidneys, heart, which shall I pick? By this point, Sakura wanted to simply fall down in a heap and cry, but she remained firm. What would Ino say if she saw her former rival now? Probably make some kind of snide joke and say that it was obvious now why she had been forgotten. I'm weak, Sakura thought with a snarl that was half sob and half growl. Suddenly, she felt something in the air move and she gripped her kunai tighter. Less than a second later, the demon of the mist was in the midst of the 4-man group and poised to cut through them all with one titanic slash. As he made a taunt at Kakashi during his wind-up, time slowed down for the pink-haired genin. Distantly, almost as if she were detached from her body, Sakura watched Sasuke and Neji start to turn in alarm. She could also see the dust being kicked up by Kakashi's Shunshin no Jutsu, but neither event really registered. With a feral cry of rage and torment, she acted. Her kunai came up from its low position and wedged itself deeply into a surprised Zabuza's ribcage. Kakashi was on him a moment later and cut a more substantial wound into the Kiri nin. Before her eyes, the wide-eyed Zabuza dissolved into a puddle of water. Sasuke, Neji, and Tazuna had all leapt away from the fight, but Sakura was stuck in place, still shocked by her own actions. The old man risked a lot by scurrying over to the frozen girl and pulling her down as a second Zabuza cut completely through Kakashi. This was also a Mizu Bunshin, however, and again the mist demon felt cold steel. It's over, the real Kakashi stated as he pressed the kunai into his opponent's neck. Oddly, however, Zabuza laughed. Fool, I'm not that easy. Sakura saw the real Zabuza before Kakashi could recover from being tricked. Sensei, behind you, she cried, pointing to Zabuza in mid-swing. Thinking fast, Kakashi dropped to his arms and legs as Zabuza's sword sailed over his head, only claiming a few stray hairs. However, this wasn't about to deter the formidable assassin as Zabuza switched hands when his sword lodged itself into the ground. With a supreme effort of acrobatics, the large Kiri nin mule kicked Kakashi square in the chest. Kakashi aimed for the lake to soften his landing after dropping a few hundred makebishi. Zabuza, undeterred by this, merely leapt over the caltrops faster than any of the genin could pick up and landed behind the Konoha nin. Suoro no Jutsu. The helpless Junin watched in horror as a sphere of water appeared from the lake he was splashing around in, trapping him there. Behind him, Zabuza laughed as if he were stealing candy from a small child. You 3, get Tazuna out of here. Kakashi called out from his prison. This fight was over the second I got caught. Zabuza raised a hairless eyebrow at that statement. What makes you think I'll just let them leave? He asked before making a one-handed seal. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. One of Zabuza's water clones rose from the serene lake like a freakish monster from the bowls of hell. Neji and Sasuke each took up position on either side of the clone, but to their surprise, the real Zabuza started laughing once again. You kids crack me up. Running around playing ninja with your little toys, how pathetic, the missing nin stated with a smirk. When I was your age, I had already dyed my hands in blood. Kakashi looked at the man who had captured him with disgust. So, Devil Zabuza is real. Sakura, only now truly recovering from her earlier bit of heroics, only caught he barest details of how Zabuza had murdered his entire graduation class when he was even younger than they were. Sasuke and Neji, while still spoiling for a fight, were obviously shaken by the revelation. Their sensei, however, had different ideas. Why aren't you all running? He shouted. You can't beat him now, run with Tazuna. He's what's important here. The genin all looked back at the old man with grim eyes. He could see that they wanted to fight, that they would rather die than let their pride take that kind of beating, and in some way he could understand it. That was why he swallowed the lump in his throat and said, since this is my fault. I'm sorry guys, fight all you want. The Zabuza clone looked down at the two genin with contempt. Even when Neji activated his Byakugan, the foe Zabuza only sneered. In a blur of motion, Neji was sent flying back into a nearby tree. A mere moment later, Sasuke was laid out on the ground. What now, little girl? The clone asked as he approached Sakura and Tazuna. I'm going to die. Sakura's mind screamed. With each step the water clone took, another memory flashed through Sakura's mind. Times when she would get picked on as a first-year student, times of when she and Ino were friends, the moment she had foolishly ended that friendship, and finally, the moment almost a year ago that she realized Ino was forgetting about her. That last defining point in her life was so gut-wrenching that Sakura snapped out of her stupor and brought her kunai up to block a very lazy strike by Zabuza's clone. I can't die here, she yelled as if she were shouting at fate itself. I refuse. As metal met imitation, Sakura could see the abject shock on the clone's face. By the time the real Zabuza had relayed more orders mentally to his creation, Sakura was in motion. Keep the clone busy, she yelled to a recovered Sasuke as she ran past him. The Uchiha amazingly complied and moved to block the clone's path. Sakura narrowed her eyes with determination as she made for the tallest tree she could see in the nearby forest. Concentrate on your chakra flow, was her mantra as she focused chakra into her feet and leapt at the tree. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps up with no trouble. Sakura almost yelled with the rush of success, but she still remembered what she had to do. Pushing her body to go even faster, she ripped up the tree like a ninja possessed until she hit the very top. With a feral cry, she pushed off the flexible tip of the tree and soared over the lake dozens of feet in the air with Kakashi and Zabuza looking on with varying degrees of surprise. Sensei, get ready, Sakura yelled as she pulled a fistful of kunai and shuriken from her pouch. Kakashi instantly caught on and readied himself as Sakura unleashed a rain of steel on Zabuza. Being immobile, he took several good hits until he was forced to retreat out of the pink-haired girl's range and release Kakashi in the process. Back on shore, Neji and Sasuke nearly collapsed with fatigue after having fended off Zabuza's clone for as long as they did. Now that Zabuza was distracted, the clone had dispersed. Back in the air, Sakura let out a haggard breath as she hit the water as dead weight. The amount of chakra she has used was considerable considering how little of it she had in the first place. That little bitch, Zabuza snarled as he ripped several kunai out of his shoulder and back. Kakashi looked at the limp Sakura and narrowed his eyes at Zabuza. If she's hurt, I'll make you regret it in every way possible, he promised before beginning their fight once again with a vengeance. Sakura weakly coughed as 2 pairs of arms pulled her from the choppy water that had been stirred up by the battle between Kakashi and Zabuza. Did you know she could do that? Neji asked his companion once he was sure Sakura was breathing. Sasuke looked down at the girl with a new respect. It wasn't much, but it was there. No, he simply answered as he turned his gaze back on the fight. Kakashi had finally gained the upper hand with the use of the Sharingan. Using the mind tricks that the 3-tone granted, the Junin had Zabuza nearly hyperventilating in the middle of the lake. You monkey bastard, Zabuza shouted, obviously distressed. I'll make it so you can't ever open your mouth again. As Zabuza flew through seals, Kakashi mimicked them all perfectly. For a moment at the end, Zabuza paused as if he were staring at the Shinigami himself. That pause was all the Konoha nin needed. Sweden. Daibakufu no Jutsu. An enormous wall of water grinded out of the lake, actually causing the water level to drop. The titanic drill hit the completely defenseless Zabuza and sent him, along with a piece of the forest, flooding out of the lake until he finally hit his back on a tree. For good measure, Kakashi put several kunai in the near-drowned Junin so he couldn't move. Sakura, who had regained consciousness when a flood of stray water bowled her and her teammates over, blinked wearily at scene before her. She could see Zabuza ask something and his eyes widened when he got his answer. Before Kakashi could do anything, however, 2 needles shot through the defeated Kiri nin's neck like a hot knife through butter. Neji raced forward to confront the newcomer, but Kakashi again waved him off. He's not our enemy, the tired Junin said as he pulled down his forehead protector. The Hyuga prodigy was obviously mad but followed his leader's instructions. Amazingly, the small hunter nin heaved both Zabuza and his massive Zanbeitu onto his back. This body has many secrets, it seems. I'll have to go dispose of it. When Kakashi made no motion to stop him, the smaller shinobi disappeared with the body of Zabuza in a swirl of leaves. Sakura managed to pull herself up so she was leaning against a tree rather than sprawled out in the mud. She could see Neji and Sasuke talking to Kakashi, but she wasn't registering any of it. She was feeling so sleepy. When her gray-haired teacher simply fell over unconscious, she smiled lazily. That's such a good idea, were her last thoughts before she followed Kakashi into a chakra-depleted sleep. Ino Buddha, a young Sakura called out in the hallway of the academy. The girl she was calling out to only gave her the shortest of looks before going back to the conversation she was having with a familiar blonde genin. Naruto, however, paused his conversation with Ino to look at the pink-haired girl running up to them. Friend of yours, Ino? He asked. The youngest Yamanaka sent a sour look at Sakura before shaking her head. Not really, she answered Naruto with an annoyed frown before turning back to Sakura. What do you want, Sakura? She asked. For a moment, the soon-to-be Kunoichi blinked at the dull-sounding way Ino had said her name. No, forehead girl, only, Sakura. For some reason, it made the contents of her stomach turn to ash. I wanted to know why you wanted to spar. Sakura mumbled, her former enthusiasm forgotten. She was acting more like her 6-year-old self than the girl she had matured into over the years. Ino looked at her former friend with a snobbish, if not amused, look. What would be the point? She asked, cutting into Sakura harder with her straightforward words more than any insult. I have to have a challenge to get better. Maybe some other time, Sakura. With that, Ino simply turned back to Naruto, trying to get the boy to have a match with her. Now completely ignored by them, Sakura wandered off. Eventually, the young pre-teen found herself sitting in one of the many training grounds trying in vain to stop crying as she stared at the hundreds of cosmos flowers that littered the grounds. With all of the pent-up rage she could muster, Sakura started ripping up every flower she could get her hands on until, late into the night, a dirt-covered Haruno returned to her home with vicious, hateful eyes that would only diminish in brightness over the coming months. Sakura awoke with a start as she shot up from the futon she was resting on. Covered in sweat and breathing heavily, she clutched at her head and forced the painful memories to retreat back to her subconscious. I feel like I got hit by a tree, Sakura commented to herself. From the light filtering into the small room she was in, the girl figured it was morning. How long she had been out of it, Sakura didn't know. Risking trying to stand, Sakura made her way to the bathroom and washed her face to become more alert. Looking down at herself, she fingered at the dried mud on her clothes, thankful that none of her team had tried to dress her. That would have been the ultimate embarrassment. Faintly, the genin smelled something particularly good coming from outside her room, and the grumbling of her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten in some time. In the kitchen of the modest dwelling, Tsunami was cooking lunch for the shinobi her father had hired. They ate a lot and were very scary in her opinion. However, she would trust her father as she always had. When she heard footsteps coming down the stairs, she turned around to see the girl they had brought with them shuffling down to the kitchen. You're awake now? Tsunami asked as she motioned to the table. Sakura smiled slightly as she took a seat and nearly cried tears of happiness when a plate of fish and rice was set down in front of her. Thank you very much, Sakura slurred with her mouth full. Tsunami laughed as the young girl practically absorbed the food put out for her. Would you like some more? She asked as Sakura put the first plate away in record time. Yes, please, Sakura answered with an embarrassed blush. She really didn't want to seem like a slob, but she was still very hungry. As her host was fixing the food, Sakura got around to asking a few questions. Where am I, anyway? How did I get here? This is my father's house, Tsunami responded as she set down another plate of food. The rest of your group went out to train, I think. You've been out for 2 days. Sakura nearly choked on her food. 2 days, she repeated, stunned. That explained why she felt so rested. Well, where are they training at? Sakura asked, wondering if they even wanted her around. Tsunami tilted her head in thought but eventually shrugged. I have no idea. They left this morning without saying much of anything. Sorry. Those guys. Sakura sighed. She knew it wasn't their fault, but they could have left a note or something. It's fine, I'll just go train by myself, I guess, Sakura said as she finished the last bite of her food. Now full and rested, Sakura stretched out her legs and started to jog along the wooden planks that made up most of the floating capital of Wave Country. In her mind, the genin thought out a few exercises for herself like she always did and headed off towards the wooded area nearby. The girl didn't know whether to be happy or worried that it no longer bothered her that she was left out of whatever training Kakashi was giving the other members of his team. Although she knew she was missing out, it was still better than getting the cold shoulder and doing nothing. Bastards, Sakura mentally hissed as she entered the forest. I was the one that saved them from that Zabuza guy. The thought of the fight brought a smile back to Sakura's face. She had learned to use her chakra to stick to things, a skill, as far as she knew, only she could perform in Team 7 excluding Kakashi himself. That small bit of triumph quickly ended when she heard the sounds of people yelling coming from deeper in the woods. Creeping ever closer, Sakura quietly made her way through the underbrush until she reached the edge of a small clearing. There, to her abject shock, were Sasuke, Neji, and Kakashi. She watched with growing rage as Kakashi directed his two students on how to use their chakra to walk up trees and then even gave them a demonstration. That. Sakura couldn't even find a word from her extensive vocabulary to describe how she saw her team at the moment. So, you teach them the only thing I have over them. The girl can't do anything better than your two prize students, can she? With a choked snarl, Sakura turned and ran as fast as her legs would carry her away from the scene. In an act reminiscent of her usual routine, Sakura didn't stop for breath until she literally couldn't run anymore. She figured she was at least a few miles away from the wave capital, perhaps on the other side of the island. The sun was high in the sky and again Sakura's stomach rumbled, but the pink-haired girl ignored it. Right now she was thinking of the best way to get out of the rut her life had become. Her teacher ignored her, she had no friends, and the one person she cared about in life didn't want anything to do with her. My life sucks, Sakura finally said, sprawling out on the forest floor. Around her, birds were chirping as if they were trying to overcome the depression practically rolling off of Sakura. I'm sure that's not true, a voice said from behind the genin. Although she was still tired, Sakura immediately reacted to the sudden intrusion. Her hand caught a kunai from her pouch and she was up and ready to strike with a moment's notice. Before her, a long-haired girl in a simple kimono stared back at her wild eyes with calm ones. The disarming air around the newcomer instantly put Sakura off her guard, but the cautious genin kept her kunai in her hand. Sorry if I startled you, the other girl stated, holding up her hands defensively. I was just out picking some herbs when I overheard you talking to yourself. Sakura finally put her kunai away and sighed. No, it's my fault. I'm a bit on edge, she lied. Strangely, Sakura could almost feel that the other girl didn't buy her excuse, and the uncomfortable silence that resulted left both parties stumped as to what they should do. Finally, the other girl made the first move. You're a ninja? She asked, pointing to the forehead protector Sakura was using as a ribbon. Oh, yeah, Sakura said quietly. She didn't feel much like a ninja at the moment. The slightly older girl nodded and went back to picking herbs. Sakura, having had Ino as a teacher in the ways of botany, quickly spotted what types the girl was looking for and started gathering with her. Muscle relaxants, right? Sakura asked as she held out a few small plants. I can help with collecting them. You're very well learned to know what kinds of plants I'm looking for, the strange girl said as she put the offered plants into her basket. Sakura beamed at the praise. It wasn't often anyone said anything good about her skills, and she felt herself becoming comfortable around the other girl. I was top of my class at botany, she boasted. The kimono-wearing girl smiled. That's very impressive. Is that why you became a ninja? To learn about plants? She asked, still picking herbs. The question caught Sakura off guard. It was an odd question, but one Sakura could understand. Wave didn't have a hidden village, after all. No, I became a ninja because my parents wanted me to, Sakura said with a hint of bitterness. Obviously, her companion caught onto it. But you don't want to be one? She asked. No, I do, but I just don't have a purpose for doing it anymore, Sakura admitted. I used to, but that person doesn't even acknowledge me anymore. The other girl seemed genuinely surprised. You have a special person you want to protect? She asked, sounding oddly enthralled with the idea. Sakura, however, sighed deeply. No, nothing like that. I just want her to notice me again. To just be around me, to consider me something other than someone not worth her attention, Sakura said, clenching the ground beneath her in frustrated rage. To get the acknowledgement of your special person, that is a worthy goal to try for, the herbal girl stated as she rose to her feet. I'm sorry I can't stay longer, but I have to prepare these. As she walked away, Sakura became more downcast. The conversation had brought up a lot of her past, things that she tried to suppress as much as possible. I will say one thing, the herbalist said before she walked out of the clearing. Sakura looked up at her with a curious, if not downcast, face. If you want that person to acknowledge you, sitting in the dirt feeling sorry for yourself won't work. Improve yourself and prove you're worth their attention and they will see what they have overlooked, were her last words as she disappeared behind a thicket of trees. Sakura was too stunned to say anything in the way of a counter-argument. The mysterious girl's words had struck a chord within her and she felt some of her former disgust returning. She's right. Sakura mentally screamed at herself, Ino will never want to be around me again if I can't even keep up with her. Stop wallowing in self-pity, Sakura. All right, Sakura yelled as she jumped to her feet. You just wait, Ino, I'll show you I'm better than that Naruto bastard. She declared to the very forest itself. Still, she had no idea how to go about such a thing and that quickly calmed her down. What should I do? The only thing new I've learned is how to use my chakra to walk on trees. Ino could do that a year ago. The sound of rushing water proved to be the answer to Sakura's question. With a sudden epiphany, the genin bolted towards the sound and found one of the hundreds of small rivers that carved their way through the island. Sakura laughed to herself as she took off her sandals. Let's see Neji or Sasuke-kun do this. The hyped girl said as she focused chakra into the soles of her feet. Taking a tentative step onto the water, Sakura fought for control as she put more and more weight on the appendage. Her foot bobbed up and down in the water like a cork. She knew it wasn't supposed to be like this as she remembered how Zabuza had looked standing on the surface of the water. He could even run around on it like it was dry land. No guts, no glory, I guess, Sakura hesitantly said as she put all her weight on the foot resting in the water. The resulting splash was enough to make the birds in the area take flight. The loud cursing coming from Sakura as she pulled herself back to shore didn't help either. Soggy, but not deterred, Sakura tried it again with more chakra. At first, she bobbed up and down on the water and it looked like she would simply sink. With a subtle chakra adjustment, however, the bobbing stopped and the genin found herself standing firm on the surface of the water. For a moment, Sakura just stared at her feet, seemingly unable to take in the fact she had succeeded. Then, reverently, she took a step. Then another, and another. Soon, the pink-haired girl was running around on the small river like it was her own personal racetrack. Grinning like an idiot, Sakura followed the river all the way back to its source, the Bay of Wave capital. She also got her first look at the massive bridge being built. Sakura was feeling a bit bold, so she ran up to one of the towering support columns of the bridge, sent more chakra into her feet, and jumped off the surface of the large bay. The extra power in her jump managed to get her a third up the structure before she had to plant her feet on the stone. It was a bit of an adjustment going from molding her chakra for water walking to climbing, but the clever genin caught on before she lost her grip. She ran the rest of the way up the column and surprised a few workers when she suddenly vaulted over the side of the railing into their work area. Hell yeah, she shouted, completely out of breath but still smiling. Let's see Ino Buddha ignore that when I show her. I bet she'll be begging me to spend time with her. Sakura let out a deep breath as she slumped down on an unopened bag of concrete. She knew that Ino could probably use her chakra like this, but it would still surprise her. Still, Ino would want something more if she were to truly want to rekindle their previous rivalry, and for the life of her, Sakura couldn't figure out anything more to learn. As the workers put away their tools and started to leave, Sakura realized just how long she has spent running around. The sun was about to set, and unless she missed her guess, Tsunami would be cooking dinner. Having missed lunch, that was a very welcome situation. Predictably, the rest of her team had beaten her back to Tazuna's house and were already seated at the table. Kakashi looked tired, but active, while Sasuke and Neji were completely worn out. Finally back from your walk? Neji asked with a sneer. Sakura didn't immediately rise to the taunt and sat down in a free chair. Finally back from yours? She asked in a dull voice. Neji narrowed his eyes at the unexpected comeback while the Uchiha smirked at him for being so blind as to walk into the verbal snap. Kakashi watched all of this with disinterest. He had already finished his meal, without letting a single person see him remove his mask, and was about to head upstairs to sleep. Feeling better, Sakura? He asked, deciding to play the good teacher for the moment. Sakura nodded with disinterest as she ate her meal. It was what Tazuna said that got her attention. Are you all ready to guard the bridge from Zabuza yet? He asked in a distressed tone. His workers were leaving left and right and he couldn't blame them. Sakura looked at Tazuna like the man was insane. Zabuza's dead. I saw that much before I blacked out. That was one of Zabuza's henchmen, Neji informed his teammate with a frown. He's most likely still alive and eager to continue with his mission. As Sakura took in this information, Kakashi cleared his throat. Sakura, starting tomorrow you'll head to the bridge with Neji and Tazuna to stand guard, he ordered. Why Neji? Sakura asked with a frown. When Sasuke grunted, the Hyuga chuckled proudly. Because I mastered the training exercise easily and the Uchiha is having difficulties with it. Sasuke slammed his chopsticks down on the table as he roughly stood from his seat. I'm going to train, he said suddenly and disappeared out the door into the night. Neji laughed to himself once again before rising from the table himself to head upstairs to his room. When Tazuna excused himself and Tsunami started working on clearing the table, Kakashi and Sakura were the only ones left. Kakashi began, how did your training go? Sakura snapped to attention at the question. If that mask wasn't in place, she could have sworn Kakashi was smirking at her reaction. It was good, she answered. Kakashi nodded and let the subject drop. Well then, I'm off to sleep. I'll need to recover for when Zabuza shows up, he said. I'm sure he'll be fully recovered in a matter of days. The pink-haired genin watched as her teacher made it up the stairs without using his crutches, so she imagined he was almost well. If Zabuza was really alive and out there, how would she survive? Most likely he would be completely on guard, so the young girl figured that there would be little she could do to help. I'll just be another thing to worry about, she thought with a sigh. Despite the gains she had reaped after a day of training, she wasn't naive enough to think that she could stand up to something like Zabuza. More and more, she became depressed thinking about all the work she had to do to even get up to Ino's level, let alone a force like the missing Nin. I have to do it, though. If I don't, I'll never get Ino back again, Sakura thought as the cold embrace of sleep overtook her. The next morning she was stirred from her dreamless sleep by the sun landing on her eyes from the open window in her room. Sakura lazily roused herself and cracked the various joints in her body as she stretched. As she became more aware of her surroundings, several things made themselves immediately apparent. The first was that it was far too late in the day. Neji should have woke her up hours ago for guard duty. The second was that the house was deathly quiet. No sounds from the kitchen, no sounds from Inari's room, which was next door. While she hadn't spent much time with the kid, Sakura knew how kids were and he should be making some noise. Quickly and quietly, Sakura grabbed her weapons pouch and checked what she had left. She silently cursed when she remembered she hadn't restocked on kunai the night before. All she had left were a few rolls of wire and several explosion tags. Weaponless and ill at ease, Sakura crept down the stairs of the house. She still couldn't hear anything and her unease was growing by the moment. Finally, at the back door of the residence, she heard what sounded like someone crying from under the stairs. Sakura quickly ran down the rest of the stairs and looked at the pitiful form of Inari curled up in a ball weeping. Inari, what's going on? Sakura asked in an urgent voice. When the child didn't answer, she shook him a few times to get him out of his shock. Sakura. They took mom, he sobbed. The genin looked to where Inari was pointing and finally saw the large hole that had been cut in the side of Tazuna's house. She hadn't seen it from the stairs due to her point of view. Quickly, Sakura turned back to Inari. How long ago? She asked. I dunno. Maybe a few minutes, the boy said as he started to cry harder. That was all Sakura needed. After telling Inari to stay put for now, she zipped out of the opening Tsunami's abductors had made. It didn't take long for her to spot them on the myriad of planks that made up the road system in the residential area. Okay, now how do I beat two Ronin with a hostage? Sakura asked herself. If she simply attacked them, either they would overpower her or the one left would kill Tsunami. Suddenly, the bright genin had an idea when she saw Tsunami fight back a bit and Sakura started to form seals. Come on, stop fighting. One of the Ronin moaned as he pulled his unwilling captive along. His partner was getting equally annoyed. Do you want us to go back and kill that brat? If you don't shape up we will, he threatened. Oh no you won't. The group stopped dead as a small girl dressed in a red dress barred their way several feet in front of them. One of the Ronin smirked as he drew his katana a fraction out of its sheath. And who's going to stop us, little girl? He asked. His partner, however, wasn't as enthusiastic. Will you forget that kid and come on? We have to get this one to the boss, he said as he fought to keep Tsunami still. But she's a ninja, the first Ronin said, pointing at Sakura's forehead protector. With a smirk, he took a classic stance for the art of drawing. He was going to try and cut her in half with one draw. Sakura, run! Tsunami screamed as her abductor took a step forward. Her words were cut off when the man drew his blade faster than she could see. The genin's eyes were wide as the blade sliced cleanly through her torso and she fell over into the water. Obviously pleased with his work, the Ronin sheathed his katana and turned back to his companion. How's that? Not even a drop of blood on my blade. His celebration was short-lived, however, as a sandaled foot contacted with his head. The real Sakura landed hard on the fallen man's chest and quickly grabbed his sword from his waist. The second abductor held Tsunami closer, using her as a shield. This, however, is what Sakura had expected and she rolled off her unconscious victim and into the water. Foolishly thinking the Kunoichi had swam off to regroup, the Ronin ran over to his downed partner. Silently, Sakura leapt up from the other side of the wooden plank, wielding the sheathed katana like a baseball bat. The man didn't even have a chance to scream out in surprise as he was knocked unconscious. Sakura! Tsunami cried as she ran to the young woman. Sakura was breathing heavily from adrenaline, but other than that she didn't seem fazed by her ordeal. I thought you had died, the woman said as she stepped over her unconscious kidnappers. I kawaramide with some of the water so that I made it look like my clone fell in. After that, all I did was walk over to the other side of the walkway to catch him off guard. Sorry about scaring you, Sakura explained. Where are Kakashi-sensei and the others? She asked, knowing that this wouldn't be the only assault. Tsunami pointed off in the distance to the bridge. They went there this morning with father, she answered. Sakura nodded and gripped the large katana in her hands a bit harder. Zabuza was most likely there, but if she didn't go her team could suffer. Tsunami, go get Inari and head to the village, you'll be safe there. Sakura yelled over her shoulder as she darted towards the bridge. Upon arriving, the first thing the kunoichi noticed was the thick mist hovering around the structure. Kurigakure no Jutsu, Sakura thought as she headed towards the sounds of fighting. Farther down the bride, she could make out what looked like a dome of mirrors and, past that, two figures fighting back and forth while Tazuna cowered behind a wheelbarrow. Avoiding the mirrors, Sakura headed to Tazuna, who nearly screamed when he saw her. Sakura, thank Kami, someone else is here, he said. What's going on? Where are Sasuke and Neji? She asked now that she could see Zabuza and Kakashi fighting in the mist. When Tazuna pointed to the dome of mirrors, Sakura narrowed her eyes in confusion. What is that thing? Tazuna shrugged as Sakura helped him to his feet. That Sasuke kid fought Zabuza's henchman, the one that helped him get away earlier, and won. Then the masked kid used one of those jutsu things you guys do and those mirrors popped up around Neji and Sasuke. Nodding her head, Sakura pushed Tazuna back down behind a stack of building supplies. Hide here, okay, she said. When he nodded, she headed towards the mirrors as there was really nothing she could do to help Kakashi. Inside the mirrors, Neji and Sasuke weren't faring very well. Even with a newly acquired Sharingan on Sasuke's side and the Byakugan with Neji, neither boy could see past Haku's needle attacks. Hyuga, distract him, Sasuke ordered as he started to do seals for another jutsu. Instead of listening, however, Neji gathered his chakra and started to spin. Kaden, he cried as a wall of chakra deflected a barrage of needles aimed at his neck. Watch what you're doing, Sasuke snapped as he dodged the needles deflected by Neji's attack. From the mirrors, Haku watched with mild disgust as his opponents did nothing but argue. He had almost hoped they would have put aside their differences and fought together, but this was proving to be an impossibility with these two. He readied two fists full of needles, ready to put an end to this and go help his precious person. It ends, he called as he darted from his mirror to strike at the unguarded genins. Sasuke-kun, watch out. Sasuke stopped bickering with Neji long enough to look to who had called him when he saw Haku's attack. Because the former hunter nin hadn't expected Sasuke to notice him while he was arguing with Neji, Haku hadn't taken any precautions in case of counterattack. The Uchiha managed to get in a strong right hook that floored the surprised Haku. Recovering quickly, the young boy darted back into his mirrors as Sakura ran into the fray. Sasuke-kun, are you alright? She asked as she eyed the numerous cuts on his skin. The moody Uchiha grunted in reply. I told you we should have woke her up, he said to Neji. She could have helped earlier. Helped how? Neji asked as he watched the mirrors for the one Haku would strike from next. She ran right in here like a fool. Tired of being ignored, Sakura stepped between the two geniuses. Enough, she yelled. What's going on? You two need to work together. We have to beat this guy and go help Kakashi-sensei. Both Sasuke and Neji turned away with sour expressions, neither wanted to work with the other but there was no way out. Seeing that she would at least get a little cooperation out of her teammates, Sakura began formulating a plan. When she looked closer at Sasuke, she noticed the Sharingan and an idea came to her. Alright, you guys listen up, she ordered as she began explaining. Inside the mirrors, Haku was at an impasse. Sakura, the girl he had gotten to know in the forest while gathering herbs for Zabuza, had finally showed up. He had hoped that she would have stayed away from the fighting but now it seemed he was destined to harm her. Perhaps even kill her if it came to that. Forgive me, Kunoichi-san, Haku thought, but I have to protect my precious person as you have to gain the attention of yours. At least one of us will succeed. Okay, you guys got the plan? Sakura asked as she finished. Are you sure you can pull it off, Sasuke-kun? Said Uchiha nodded grimly. My Sharingan isn't as advanced as Kakashi's but it can at least do that. I am ready, he stated with a grim determination. Sakura nodded back and looked at Neji, he seemed ready as well. Taking a deep breath, the katana-wielding kunoichi made a rush for the gap between the mirrors as if she were trying to escape. Haku reacted on instinct as he practically flew out of his mirror and towards the fleeing girl, needles extended and aimed for her neck. Forgive me. Sasuke. Now, Sakura cried as she suddenly turned on her heels and slid her pilfered katana out of its sheath. Weapons met with a shower of sparks as Haku's needles were countered by Sakura's steel. Off to the side, Sasuke's hands moved like lightning as his Sharingan predicted what mirror Haku would flee into. Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu. The fireball hit its mark as the mirror Haku was about to jump into was covered in flames. While the ice didn't melt, it made Haku change direction and double back to find a clear mirror. As soon as the young nin turned, however, he ran right into a strike by Neji. You were within my divination, Neji calmly stated as he took stance. Haku, stunned from the first blow, had no chance at dodging as all of his tenketsu points were sealed by the Hake Rokujian Sho. As his chakra was cut off, the mirrors surrounding the genin fell and they found themselves free. Neji and Sasuke, no longer concerned with their former opponent, ran off to guard Tazuna. Sakura was about to do the same when Haku caught the hem of her dress and caused her to pause. You fought. Well, Haku admitted with a cough, I'm sure, your precious person will acknowledge you now. Sakura gasped in realization. It was you. You were that girl in the forest. How could you be with someone like Zabuza? She demanded in an accusatory tone. After a bit of maneuvering, Haku managed to pull off his mask. He is my precious person that I would protect until death, he admitted. Wouldn't you do the same? The missing nin's words hit Sakura and drudged up all of the pain and depression Ino had caused her. Ino, we can never gain back what we lost all those years ago, Sakura whispered in a quiet voice. But, we don't need to, she continued in a stronger voice, this time with more passion. We can make a new foundation, we can start over. I won't let things end like this, I will get Ino back. Haku smiled as brightly as he could at the girl standing over him. He could feel her determination and it gave him the strength to force his body into motion. Apparently, Neji had been too worn out when he had attempted to completely seal Haku's chakra. Sakura's katana was out in a moment but Haku caught her hand before she could swing. My fight with you is over, Sakura-san, he said in a low, gentle voice. I have to protect my precious person, the former hunter nin said as the faint sound of chirping birds filled the air. Sakura's eyes were wide with surprise as Haku simply vanished from in front of her. She felt the air change and she was running before she consciously knew what she was doing. Kakashi seemed to move in slow motion as he charged forward at the captured Zabuza, his fist ablaze with the Reikiri. He saw Haku zip past him using the Shunshin no Jutsu but his course was already set. With the disgusting smell of frying flesh, the Junin's hand cut through Haku's body as if it weren't even there. What was more was that He-Boy had also destroyed his summoning scroll causing his nin dogs to disappear. What a useful tool I picked up! Zabuza exclaimed, winding up his sword for one last slash. Giving me this last chance, what a great student you were, Haku. Kakashi pulled his fist out of Haku's flesh just in time for him to backstep from the slash. What he hadn't counted on, though, was Sakura to charge in past him. Zabuza's eyes widened as he watched the small, unassuming girl he had threatened earlier charge in under his own Zanbeitu sweeping arc with a large katana. He didn't so much as flinch as the cold steel cut through one of his lungs and out his back. His breath ragged, he stumbled back and used his sword to stand upright. Why you took my advice, he laughed. The irony of the situation was too much for him to take as he ripped the sword out of his chest and tossed it over the side of the bridge before collapsing onto his back. Sakura looked down at the blood on her hands and started to shake. Her body and training had acted for her, delivering the strike before she could stop herself. Tears started to roll down her cheeks as the pool of blood beneath the demon of the mist started to grow larger. Zabuza, however, raised his hand and motioned for the girl to come closer. Kid, come here, he said as Sakura moved towards him like a broken doll. That W was a good cut, he said as he laughed yet again. You killed one of the S7 swordsmen, see congratulations. I didn't want to kill anyone. Sakura sobbed as she fell to her knees beside the former Junin. I'm so sorry. Don't say that, it's what we were born to do, Zabuza stated, causing Sakura to look up at him. Seeing that face reminded him too much of Haku the first time his companion had asked what a ninja was. We are tools, forged by the village we were born in. That's all they want us to be, don't, the fallen demon coughed up a stream of blood as his pulse raced. He could feel his time running out. Don't let them do it, become your own person. You are not their tool. Sakura wiped her eyes with her free hand as Zabuza grabbed her other. How do I do that? How can I possibly do that? Sakura asked, her voice still laced with quiet sobs. Zabuza struggled with his other hand as he reached the hilt of his sword. With a supreme effort, he pulled it up to the young girl and put the long hilt in her hands. With this Kubikiri Houcho you cut anyone that would dampen your spirit, he stated, releasing both the sword and the kunoichi's hand. It's yours to use as you see fit. Sakura felt the weight of the weapon in her hand and was overcome by the trust she had just been given. Why me? She asked in a small voice. Zabuza laughed once again and coughed up more blood. Haku liked you, he said simply before he closed his eyes. Kakashi, bring him to me. Please. The Konoha Junin, who had until now been quiet, silently brought the body of Haku over to the fallen warrior. Zabuza managed to turn his head even as his eyesight went dim. Haku, I hope I get to go to the same place as you, I pray I do. With that, the demon of Kurigakure left the earth, finally free from the wills of men as the first snowflakes of winter drifted down around them. Sakura struggled to stand with the massive Zanbeitu that had been entrusted to her. She managed to get it parallel to her body and found that the base of the blade continued up to the top of her head. Still, she drew strength from the weapon just from being around it. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura called out, do you think Zabuza and Haku were bad people? She asked still looking down at the peaceful companions. The Junin's eyes lost their edge as he also looked at the pair. Finally, he made up his mind. No, I don't. Zabuza was just following what he thought was right, as was Haku. I can't call them bad people. Sakura nodded with a determined scowl on her face to cover her tears. I'll be just like them, then, I'll serve me and my ideals, what I think is right, she whispered. Kakashi heard her and nodded. Right now he too was questioning the way of the hidden villages. So the big, bad demon has bit the big one, Sakura and Kakashi turned to see the walking sack of fat that was Gedu waddling up the bridge with a small army at his back. He took a look at Haku and Zabuza before breaking out in laughter that quickly traveled through his ranks. Pathetic ninja. They aren't so tough now, are they? Shut up, Sakura whispered to herself as she gripped the hilt of Kubikiri Haucho. Gedu didn't catch the mood, however, as the man walked right up to the corpses of Zabuza and Haku. Serves them right. If they aren't of any use then they should die, he stated as he poked the corpse of Haku with his foot. With a final laugh, he looked over at Kakashi. Well, I guess I should pay you for taking care of these fools, How much more if I hire you to destroy this bridge? I'll double your normal rate, what do you saw? He never got a chance to finish. With a feral cry, Sakura ripped the massive Zanbedu out of the ground and let the blade have the blood of Gedu. The wide swing Sakura had used ripped the portly man in half with his torso and head landing several feet away while his legs remained upright bathing the bridge in a rain of blood and snow. Don't ever insult shinobi that would risk their lives in my presence, she snarled at the splintered body of Gedu. Kakashi sighed and put his kunai back in his pouch with a pout. He had wanted to dispatch the disgusting business mogul from this life. The small army of Gedu started to shout for repayment as their paycheck had just bit the dirt. They stopped talking when Sakura, painted red from both Zabuza's and Gedu's blood, stepped forward with Kubikiri Haucho still in her hands and the swirling mist from Zabuza's jutsu still lingering around her body, wrapping her in a silhouette of haze. Leave, now, before I kill you myself, she snarled. With every step forward she took, the group of disorganized Ronin took a collective step backwards. One of them, having seen Zabuza alive, shouted, it's a demon. The demon of the mist came back to life. That was all it took. The group collectively ran for their lives from this new incarnation of evil standing before them. When they were halfway down the bride, they met a large group of townspeople being led by Tsunami and Inari. Now outnumbered and caught between 2 points of certain death, the Ronin leapt over the side of the bride and into the choppy water below. Kakashi carefully approached Sakura and pried the Zanbedu from her grasp. Sakura, calm down, he stated as he struggled to keep the massive blade steady. You're going to hyperventilate. Hi, sensei, Sakura said as she fell unceremoniously to the ground. Seeing that Sakura had finally came off of her adrenaline rush, he laid Kubikiri Haucho down on the ground beside her and went to go check on a stunned Neji and Sasuke. Can I do it though? Sakura asked herself as she stared at her reflection in the blade of her new weapon. Can I protect my precious person and still live my life the way I want, Haku? As if it were answering her question, a lone snowflake landed on her nose causing the pink-haired girl to look up. There she saw the sky clearing and a ray of sunshine spotlighted the entire bridge, cutting through the mist and ending the sudden snowfall. Yeah, I think I can, Sakura said as she smiled up at the heavens above her, grasping the handle of Kubikiri Haucho. Watch out, Ino, whether you like it or not I'm a part of your life again.